Hi everyone, this is Arcadius and welcome back to Naval Creed. Today we're going to start going over something that I've been working on for quite a while now actually, and I've told or mentioned it in a few videos I've already recorded. Um, this is going to be my predictions for future Naval Creed tech trees for existing and potential future countries added to the game. And then I will have a separate video afterwards going over like future prism ships, event ships, gem ships, stuff like that. I have split it up into two different videos to help cut it down, though I will warn you this video will be exceedingly long because I have quite a few things to go over. Now, as already mentioned, I have done these kind of videos before, specifically about 2 years ago. Some of that has already come to fruition in terms of the French destroyers and what do they call it? I call it Rhode Island. I forget what they actually call it. Minnesota, I think. I don't know. But the large rank point German or American battleship. I kind of predicted that as well, though not nearly as strong as the way they put it in the game. Nonetheless, I do enjoy trying to predict what could potentially be in the game in the future. So I've tried to make the following tech tree lines that I'm about to present as close to realistic as possible, using as many real ships as I can. However, that is not going to be completely possible with every country, as you're well aware. There will be some paper ships as well. But I have tried to make those as realistic as possible. So we have quite a bit to go over in this video. We have French cruisers, German destroyers, Italian cruisers, Pan-Asian destroyers, Pan-Asian cruisers, Pan-American destroyers, Pan-American cruisers, Pan-European destroyers, Pan-European cruisers, and a couple other filler destroyers for a few tech tree lines that are already in the game, and a potential Russian destroyer split that I think might could be a potentially good thing as well. So we have all of that to go through today. So if you're interested in any of that, well, buckle up and we'll get to it at some point. Like I said, though, it will be a long video, but I will try and make it as easy to understand as possible and explain my reasoning for some things as well. I'm actually going to start with the filler destroyers, since there's only a few of them. What I mean by filler destroyers is, for some of the destroyer tech tree line in the game, they're missing a few matchmaking tiers. So, for example, Russian destroyers, you have Novik at a matchmaking 2.0, and then you go all the way to Gnevny at 5.0, but you don't have a tier 3 and you don't have a tier 4. So you could fill those in as well. There's also not a tier 6 or tier 7 either. No, there's a couple other missing ones. And the Russian one, the French one starts at tier 5 as well. There's no 2, 3, or 4. The British need some, even Japanese is missing one destroyer tier as well. So it's just things like that where I just see that as laziness, honestly. There's so many available ships to choose from, especially in those early years. You don't even need paper ships. They're not going to be strong by any means. They're going to be like World War I ships or just past like the interwar period. But I mean, they're still there. They can still be put in the game. So I'll just kind of add a few of those just to fill out the rest of the lines as well. And then we'll go and start talking about the new lines that I think could be added. So we're actually going to start with the Japanese. Now, the Japanese actually have quite a few destroyers. Not saying they're lacking in any kind of way or shape or form. However, if you actually pay attention to the matchmakings, you have Sakura, or for me that's Tachibana, at 1.7 matchmaking, and you have Wakatake at 1.8 matchmaking, and then it jumps to Minikaze at 4.0. So they're actually missing a 3.0 matchmaking destroyer. And actually, every country is, except America, since the Wix is the only 3.0 destroyer currently in the game. So in a lot of games where you play Wix or you play tier 3, you're only going to come across Wix and nothing else. So I feel like there needs to be a lot more variety, especially with destroyers and cruisers. That's why I am mainly focusing on destroyers and cruisers. There has been the potential for battleship lines that could be added. However, with a few of the event ships and prism ships that Naval Creed has already added into the game, kind of makes it that much harder to actually make those lines come to fruition. So I've actually stayed away from battleship and battlecruiser lines. We have more than enough battleships in the game already. Now, I'm not saying we can't have any more prism or event ships, because I have plenty of those, but actual battleship lines, not so much. All right, so got a little off course there. Back to Japanese destroyers. So we go from Tachibana and Wakatake all the way to Minikaze. Now, Tachibana is not really the best destroyer. It's got the smallest guns in the game at only 76 millimeters, but it's got some pretty long-range torpedoes. Wakatake has larger guns that actually do decent damage for the tier that she's at, but with only two twin 21-inch torpedoes, you really don't have that much torpedo firepower, and they have a long reload comparatively as well. So I would say a good tier 3 would be Kawakaze. And I'll have pictures and everything like that afterwards, so don't worry about that. I'll show you what she actually looks like. But Kawakaze goes 37.5 knots, has 3 single 120 millimeter guns, and 3 twin 533 millimeter or 21-inch torpedo tubes. So I would see this ship being between, Tachibana, Sakura, that's what it is. I've called it Tachibana for so long, I have to remember what her actual name in game is, and Minikaze. So she'd be faster than Sakura, but slower than Minikaze, since Minikaze goes 39 knots. She would get the increased firepower that Minikaze shares, but only with 3 guns, so it would be the same kind of gun power as Wakatake, actually. But she would get the 3 twin 21-inch torpedo tubes that Minikaze does, that Wakatake doesn't. So it's a nice little in-between Wakatake and Minikaze. And that's kind of what I'm shooting for here. When I'm saying filler destroyers, I mean something that's stronger than the one that it's coming after, and weaker than the one that comes after it, if that made sense. So I have quite a few encyclopedias on ships, so you're going to see pictures like this in pretty much every single tech tree line I show you here. So this is an example of Kawakaze. So it doesn't look exactly like Minikaze. It kind of has a more Sakura feeling, but you have the one gun in the front, one gun right behind the bridge, and then one gun on the aft deck house with the 3 torpedo tubes centered on the center line there. So it's like a nice little in-between, and that's really what I'm shooting for here. It's just we need more tier 3 destroyers, and they have consistently skipped past that for the last 2 lines, honestly. So this is what Kawakaze is, and this is a picture of what she is. All right. Next, we are going to go back to the French destroyers. We had already mentioned them just a moment ago. How it goes it starts at tier 5 and then goes to tier 10. Which the French destroyers, yes, I still have to do videos on those. I will get those done soon. But there's still so many ships that they are viable to choose from. So I have a few options. Options. I have ships that could fit very well for tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4 for the French destroyer line. So here we have Bisson, we have Ensign Gabold, and we have Aventurier. Mispronouncing those terribly, I'm sure, but let's just go over what they have. So Bisson would have 30 knot speed, 2 single 4-inch guns, and 2 twin 450 millimeter guns. Yes, 2 single 100 mils is not a lot, but it's also tier 2, and not a lot of ships have that much firepower anyways. You still have bigger guns than the Japanese tier 2 destroyer, so that's a plus. Tier 3 would be Ensign Gabold, slightly faster at 31 knots, 3 single 4-inch guns, so you get another one, and then 2 twin 450 mils again. Tier 4 would be Adventure at 32 knots, again slightly faster, 4 single 4-inch guns, so more firepower, 2 twin and 2 single 450 millimeter guns. So this would actually have a torpedo broadside of 5 torpedoes. And then you actually follow up with that for the tier 5 that's already in the game, Boresk. That goes 33 knots, has 4 single 130mm guns, so the same number of guns, but just increased caliber. And you have 2 triple 550mm torpedo tubes. So larger diameter torps and 1 more torp per side. So the first one is Bison. Again, only 2 guns. That's really going to be its main drawback. However, it's still going to have quite good torpedo power. I'm not sure how far they would allow the French heel to go, but having a couple base heels on the ship to make up for the fact that she has lower firepower would be an interesting idea. And obviously speed boost as well. But no smoke screen. I do like having a destroyer line and no smoke screen. It is a disadvantage, but it gives a variation, so not every destroyer line is the same. And this is a couple pictures of Bison. There you go. Next is Enzingabold. So as you can see there, she has 2 guns on the front and 1 gun on the stern, and the torpedo tubes amidships there. So just a little bit improved version, but still would work quite nicely. There we go. And then we have Aventure. So this one actually has a unique gun layout. You have 1 right on the bow, you have 1 amidships, and then you have 2 kind of on either side of the aft deck house there. And then the torpedo tubes are amidships as well somewhere. This picture doesn't really do it justice. So yes, you have a lot of guns, but they're also not in the best configuration. So you're kind of like a Minikaze actually at this point, which would make sense because she's also a tier 4. So a little bit worse gun layout, but you have more guns and more torpedoes. And here you have a picture of her as well. And 1 more. So yeah, these I feel would be a good little starter for the French destroyer line instead of just immediately jumping in at tier 5. Yes, the tier 2, 3, 4, whatever ships, you play a couple games in them, you promote them, and then you move on. Yes, I understand that. But still just having that experience and the ability to play these low tier ships is fun in its own right. And honestly, sometimes tier 4 or lower is where I like to play. If I'm having a rough day, I'll just take an easy little win there. I sail around with my Novik and just completely annihilate the bots. That's fun for me. So just having the option to have these little French destroyers would be quite nice. But like I said, there's plenty of options to choose from. Honestly, I just feel it's a tad lazy to not have an entire tech tree when you have the ability to. Alright, so we've talked about Japanese destroyers and French destroyers for fillers. The next one we have is the British. The British start at matchmaking tier 4 with Valkyrie, go all the way up to Daring there. They're all nice little good ships. Valkyrie is surprisingly good actually too. Her torpedoes are absolute garbage. I will give her that, but she's a pretty good gunboat, and her AA is pretty noticeable for its tier. Now again, tier 4 carriers are not anything special, but you know, you have something that no other tier 4 destroyer has. But again, we are missing tier 2 and tier 3. So here are a couple options for those tiers as well. We have Medea, 32 knot speed, 3 single 4-inch guns, and 2 twin 21-inch torpedo tubes. And we have a tier 3 Nimrod, 34.5 knots, 4 single 4-inch guns, and 2 twin 533mm torpedo tubes as well. So the main thing with these is, again, you want to be a little bit worse than Valkyrie, but not so bad that no one wants to play you. But these are a nice little mix. Valkyrie actually comes in at tier 4 at 34.2 knots, so just a tad little bit slower. And then the same kind of armament as Nimrod. But if I remember correctly, there's actually a different gun layout for Nimrod, but we'll see. So here is Medea. You have 3 guns, so you have 1 on the bow, 1 on the stern, and 1 amidships. And then you have 2 twin torpedo tubes amidships as well. Not the best gun layout, but again, you're tier 2, so you're not going to have the best of anything. You're a starter destroyer. But the British consumables are going to be really good as well because you have the British smoke and the British speed boost as to add on to that. And there's a picture of her. And yep, different gun layout as I expected. For Nimrod, you still have the same armament as Valkyrie, except you have it in different places. You have one gun on the bow, one gun on the stern, and two guns amidships, along with the torpedo tubes and the rear amidships. So the reason why I think this would be a good tier 3 is because Valkyrie would have the same armament, except in a better configuration. So it would be an improvement in that way. You could use more guns on target without showing a lot of your ship. So that would be a good option for tier 3 as well. There's a picture of her. So again, not too many destroyers, just enough to give some variety, finish up and fill out the tech trees. I just don't understand why you won't put tech trees in and only have half of them. You literally have tier 5 through 10, so, well, for some. But yeah, those are the British. Lastly, for filler destroyers, we look to Russia. Russia doesn't have nearly as many destroyers as I think it should. That's why I'm doing this video. But it's actually surprisingly low. You have a tier 2, you have tier 5, you have 7, 9, and 10. And that's it. Now, there are a couple other destroyers. Actually, I think there's just one. You have New Strashimi at tier 8, but that's not a tech tree ship. So, there's a few other options that they could use to fill in the rest of those tiers. So let's take a look at those. So you would have Novik to start out with. So Novik itself is already extremely strong. Let's see, what was the speed? I have a little notebook here to go up against. Novik, 37 knots, 4 single 4-inch guns, and 4 twin 456mm torpedo tubes. And by far, she is the strongest tier 2 destroyer you will probably ever see, even among the ones that I am referencing in these videos. Just because she has all of her torpedo power on the center line, and her guns are really good too and strong, and she's insanely fast. We do slow down a bit with Dersky at 3.0, and we only have 3 single 4-inch guns, but we get 5 twin 450mm guns. Yes, that is 10 torpedoes. So you trade in a couple of your guns and some of your speed, but you get even more torpedoes. Which honestly at tier 3, you're going to kind of want to need, because that's when you really start seeing the good battleships. 4 is an Islasiv destroyer. You go up a little bit in speed, 35 knots, 5 single 4-inch guns, and 3 triple 450mm torpedo tubes. So improved firepower and almost as good as torpedoes. You could expect a better torpedo range from 3.0 to 4.0 as well to make up for losing that one torpedo, or potentially even higher damage too. 5, we already have Gnevny in the game, which is a good spot for her. She goes 38 knots, has 4 single 130mm guns, and 2 triple 533mm torpedo tubes. So a little bit faster than Islasiv. She has less guns, but they are of a higher caliber, and honestly, you can Citadel Congos with them, so they're fun. And then torpedo tubes, you do lose an entire triple mount, but you get larger torpedoes. Again, potentially larger warhead, potentially longer range, things like that to make up for it. From Gnevny, we would go to Podvoisky. Now, this is a paper ship. You might recognize the name from World of Warships. Sometimes they actually have good ideas. I have a very negative aspect or outlook on that game in recent years, but they still have some decent ideas on, well, when it comes to paper ships, because that seems all they can do nowadays. But Podvoisky would go at 40 knots. It'd be pretty similar to a Leningrad, actually, which is, again, already in the game. It would have the 5 single 130mm guns and the same kind of orientation, but only 2 triple 533mm torpedo tubes. So the guns of Leningrad, but the torpedoes of a Gnevny. So it's a nice little in-between between Gnevny and Leningrad. Obviously, at tier 7, you have Leningrad herself, again, who is already in the game. 42 knots, 5 single 130 mils, and 2 quad 533 millimeter torpedo tubes. So you have the same guns, you're faster, and you get 2 extra torpedo mounts. Lastly, you have Tier 8. Now, Minsk is actually going to be almost identical to Leningrad, except for one thing where I think she can improve. So you already have a slightly faster speed of 43 knots, which is, again, insanely fast for any destroyer. You have 5 single 130 millimeter guns, and then you have the same kind of torp setup as well. 2 quad 533 millimeter torpedo tubes. But I would say she could have improved anti-aircraft defense as well. Usually, the Russian destroyers is nothing to write home about when it comes to anti-aircraft defense. But at Tier 8, you're really coming across some strong carriers, and I don't need you to make it exceptionally strong, but better than Leningrad would be nice. I mean, Tashkent's god awful in its own way, which would be the next ship at 9.0. And at that point, you would get 3 twin 130s, I'm pretty sure they are. The insane speed of, I don't even know, it's like 45 knots or something. And then you would get 3 triple 533 millimeter torpedo tubes. So you're back to 9 torpedo tubes. But let's just take some pictures here. So this is Dersky here. Was it 3 guns? Yeah, 3 guns. And then you can see all the torpedoes just lining up left and right. You have 2 in the forward amidships, 2 in the rear amidships, and then 1 just straight on the aft stern. That's a lot of torpedo power, but to get them all off, you do need to still show a lot of broadside. So that's kind of a balancing factor there as well. And then 3 guns is nothing to write home about, and 2/3 of your firepower is on the stern. So yeah, but you're going to be really fast at 34 knots. That's still a lot faster than a lot of other ships here. There's a picture of her in all her glory here. What a nice looking destroyer as well. Next we have Islasov. So you just throw more guns on, as many guns as physically possible on, and then you have 3 triple torpedo tubes, again, which is insanely strong. But at Tier 4, you're going to want as much torpedo firepower as possible because the battleships start getting quite big. Drawback is kind of similar with Gnevny. You have short-range torpedoes. You just have a lot of them. So I could see that happening quite easily. At that point, we would go to Gnevny, which is already in the game, and then we would go to actually, we have a picture here. You can see the 2 guns on the front, the 3 guns on the stern, and then you have the torpedo tubes centered amidships there. Next is Podvoisky. Again, this is one of the World Warships paper ships. So yes, it looks like a Leningrad, but it's not quite a Leningrad. The torpedoes are what make a difference here. Potentially longer reload of guns than Leningrad as well, just to make it an upgrade when you do get to her. Again, this is what she looks like. Pretty straightforward, honestly. And then we have Minsk, which was an actual ship. It was an improved Leningrad, but not so much that there was a big difference. It was mainly hull structure, actually. But Minsk, as you can see here, it's the same kind of thing. This one I'm actually kind of iffy on. I don't want to have copycat ships in the game. I really don't like that. And this one is cutting it really close to being in a copycat of Leningrad. But potentially you could add quintuple torpedo tubes. Or, like I said, you could have her increased anti-aircraft. You could do something else to make her just different enough that it's not the same. It would still be an improvement over Leningrad, but not so much an improvement that it would outdo Tashkent. So, a few options there to choose from. Again, quite easy to just fill in the rest of the tech tree there. It would be quite difficult at this point, considering there's players like me who has already unlocked every Russian destroyer there is in the tech tree line. So to add lower tiers when the higher tiers are already unlocked would cause some difficulty, but they should have just done this to begin with. But they have time to fix a mistake as well, because there's still options to choose from. And then we only have one more filler class to go over. The last little filler class I have for tech trees that are currently in the game is actually back to Russia. Specifically, their cruisers. You go from, I think you actually start at 4.5 with Krasny Krim. You go from Novik and then you unlock the cruiser, versus how it is with literally every other country in the game where you have the tier 1 cruiser and then that unlocks the destroyer. So here are the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 cruisers that I think could be added. So we have Krasnoy Znaima, I'm pronouncing that probably, at 1.0. She's going to look very funny when I show you the picture, but that's actually part of the reason why I like her so much, is just the way she looks. She's a gunboat that goes 19 knots. She has 5 single 130mm guns. Now you're probably saying, wow, that's a lot of firepower for a tier 1. But you have smaller guns than Erie and Brimmer, because they have 150 and 152mm guns, so they're larger caliber. And they have 4 of them each. Specifically, Erie can use all 4 on one side. And then you look at ships that have, like, Black Swan, which has 6 guns. Now, they're not nearly as good, but Black Swan has the highest DPS of any tier 1 ship out there. So it's not far-fetched to say 5 single 130 mils is about average, actually. Next, you would go to Zemchug, which is an improved Novik cruiser class, not Novik destroyer. They are actually 2 separate things. It can be confusing though. 24 knots, 8 single 120mm guns, no torpedoes or secondaries or anything like that. And then a tier 3 Bogatyr at 23 knots, 2 twin and 8 single 6-inch guns, and 2 single 450mm torpedo tubes submerged. Now, when it comes to torpedoes, I'm just going to give a, well, actually in secondaries too. Let me talk about secondaries first. Anything that is smaller than a main gun, but larger than 75 or larger than equal to 75mm guns, I count it as a secondary. That does not necessarily mean they have to be counted as secondaries. It's just putting that out there. For example, Worcester AA is twin mounted 3-inch guns, but they're not secondaries. They're just anti-aircraft guns. But you have the 3-inch guns on Mikasa. Those are counted as secondary. So it kind of, it's dependent on what the ship is. I just wrote it down, and Naval Creed can figure it out afterwards if they wanted to. When it comes to torpedoes, I added them if the ship had them most of the time. I didn't do that for all of them. But they're not necessarily a requirement by any means. So, like, submerged, yes, we have submerged torpedo tubes in the game. I'm looking at you, Weymouth. That's honestly why I have a lot of submerged torpedo tubes in some of my tech trees, mainly because I've already done it before in the game. In Weymouth, you have the O class as well. H39 has submerged torpedo tubes, so it can be done. And so this is just showing you what it could have as well. Now, obviously, 2 torpedoes, 1 per side, is not going to do anything other than just a YOLO rush. But at 23 knots, again, you're not going to get anywhere fast. But, they're there if you want them. So let's start with Krasnoy Znaima. Yep, it looks hilarious, but I love it. As you can see, you have 2 guns on the front, 1 gun facing astern, and then 2 amidships. So at any point, you can actually only have 1 gun directly bow and 1 gun directly astern. You actually have to maneuver your ship to get all of your guns facing forward, or off to the broadside there. Now, she actually only went 14 knots, so I have bumped up her speed a little bit because tier 1 cruisers usually go between 19 and 20 knots. So 19 knots it is. I kind of made it go a little bit slower because of the firepower. 5 guns would still be the most, no, Black Swan has 6, but the most high caliber guns, you could say, at tier 1. But versus, World of Warships with Orlan there, I think that one is just a paper ship still. You could do a tier 1 cruiser with a gunboat. You don't have to make a paper ship for tier 1. I promise you that. And this is actually proof that she existed. Next we have Zemchug. A little bit older kind of ship. As you can see there, she's like an early 1900s cruiser, but she has some good firepower. That being 8 single 120 millimeter guns, so she is actually a speed increase as well, 24 knots, and then 4 guns on each side. It's not a lot, but if they're just rapid fire guns, because they're 120s, then yeah, you can do a lot of damage there. There's a picture of her as well. Ignore the British flag. It's probably when she was in a British port or something. And then last we have Bogatyr, which is actually a pretty nice ship. When I used to play World of Warships, this was one of the ones I played a lot as well. So you're going to see that she actually has twin gun turrets, fore and aft, and then the 8 single 6-inch guns are arranged in casemates along the edge of the ship as well. So pretty much bristling with guns, and that's what makes her fun. And the 2 single torpedo tubes, actually looks like one might be in the bow there. I'm not sure. Maybe the other one's directly astern. Who knows? But again, 2 torpedoes really not going to make that big of a difference in the game, so why not have them anyways? And that's all I have for filler ships. So now we actually get to we can get to what people want to see and my predictions for the future tech tree lines. And we're going to start with the French. All right, French cruisers. So in the first video I did of this 2 years ago, I did talk briefly about a French cruiser line. However, I had tried to split it between a heavy and a light cruiser line. They simply did not have enough cruisers to do that, so a lot of that was empty or up to possible paper ship designs. I have now decided to combine heavy and light cruisers, and we'll see if you like it or not, but it seems like it would make sense for me. So we have tier 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down to 10, so a full tech tree. Okay, we're going to get that out of the way. A lot of my predicted tech trees have every single tier filled. I think there was only one that was missing at tier 8, and I actually just filled that out today. So we're good there. Before we actually get into the ships themselves, let's talk consumables, because that is a big thing between tech tree lines, is their variation between ships, but also between consumables. So starting at tier 4, you'd get a heal all the way through. It's pretty standard cruiser heal. But you'd also get speed boost, which is unique to cruisers. I think only Algerie right now has speed boost as a cruiser, which makes sense because she is a French cruiser. So that would follow right in line with her. And then at tier 8, 9, and 10, you'd actually get gun reload booster, which the French battleships have, or at least some of them. I honestly am surprised they haven't used gun reload booster more than they have. It's such a powerful consumable that it's honestly a no-brainer. Now, obviously, you don't want to abuse it and give every single ship reload booster, but it'd still be nice to have more than just a few. So I feel like the French tech tree line could finish out by having the gun reload booster. Now let's go over the ships themselves. Bougainville. We have a 19 knot speed, 3 single 139 millimeter guns. So again, pretty average for high caliber guns. You're actually going to be a little less because Erie has 4, Broomer has 4, and Krasny Zanaima would have 5. Then Hashidate, Black Swan, everything that has smaller caliber guns than you. You actually get an aircraft though. Yes, it comes with a plane. Well, it was removed later, but it was originally commissioned with a plane. And you know what? Tier 1 cruisers do have anti-aircraft stats, or some of them do. I don't think Broomer does, actually. It's just not there at all. But there's like no smoke or anything, so why not just add a plane there for laughs and giggles? Because you're going to start so close, you don't need a plane to spot, but you might as well have it too. I have seen tier 1s be tossed into like tier 4, tier 5 games as well. I have bid one of those tier 1 cruisers before. So, you know what? Why not? It won't hurt anything. Next would be tier 2, Jurien de la Gravière. It's a World War II cruiser. You increase speed to 23 knots, and she has 8 single 165mm guns. Yes, it's a strange caliber, but it's kind of arranged to have the ship has guns bristling in every side. Well, again, I have pictures of all of these, and I'll explain more. Next is a 3.0 Pluton. This is actually a mine-laying cruiser, and there are other options for a Tier 3, don't get me wrong, but I've actually had a strange attachment to the ship. She just looks very nice to me, and I actually feel like it would be a good start with the French destroyer line or French cruisers, because you're going to want speed. That is the mainstay of the French line no matter where you go. The French battleships are fast, the cruisers could be fast, and the destroyers are insanely fast as well. You just look at Mogador. So speed is going to be a key trait for all French ships. So you go from the 23 knots at Tier 2, and you go all the way up to 30 knots at Tier 3. And you're pretty much all the way around that to Tier 10. So you're not actually missing out on much speed at all. So you already have fast speed. You have 4 single 139mm guns. So yes, you're not nearly as powerful gun-wise as the Tier 2, but you have your speed as an advantage. You also have 4 single 75 mils. Probably use those just as anti-aircraft guns, but you know, they're there for secondaries if so you choose them. No torpedoes though on any of these first ships, mainly for Tier 2 and Tier 3. Tier 3, that could be a downside, but I'm looking, it'd be similar to a Tenryu, except you don't have torpedoes, but you wouldn't be you'd be faster than a St. Louis. So you have that as well. Next would be Duguay Trouin, 33 knots, 4 twin 155mm guns. That's in, well, 4 twin turrets, 2 forward, 2 aft. Pretty standard layout. 4 single 75 mils again. But this time we get torpedoes. 4 triple 550mm guns and 2 planes. The torpedoes are going to be probably short ranged, considering the number of them. Is quite a lot of torpedoes for a Tier 4 cruiser. But those guns are pretty nice as well. 4 twin 6-inch guns. That's pretty similar to Leander, actually. And the only difference in terms of torpedoes is that Duguay Trouin would get 2 extra torpedoes per side, because Leander has a quad on each side. At 5.0, we start getting into the more modern ships with Emile Bertin. We have 34 knot speed, 3 triple 152mm guns, 2 fore, 1 aft. We have 1 twin 90mm gun for giggles, I guess, and then 2 triple 550mm guns and 2 aircraft. So we do lose torpedoes, but we get more guns, and they're arranged in a better orientation as well, because you have 6 guns facing forward, so you have a better chance of damaging an enemy when you're chasing them down as well, or adding more damage to it. Starting with probably Emile Bertin, some good anti-aircraft defense as well too. Next we go to La Galissonière. It's an improved Emile Bertin, so you're going to see a lot of similarities here. 35 knots, so again we're still picking up speed. 3 triple 152mm guns in the same orientation. 4 twin 90mm guns, so these are actually kind of useful there. And then 2 twin 550mm torpedo tubes with 4 aircraft. So again, we're losing some torpedo tubes, but honestly, it wouldn't hurt just to make that a triple to even it out. I just wrote down what she historically had. But this would be the most advanced light cruiser that you would have in the tech tree line. Because next, we go to heavy cruisers, actually. Now, mind you, there is already one French heavy cruiser in the game. That is Algerie at 7.5 matchmaking. So Suffren at 7.0 has to be a little bit worse than Algerie. Algerie was like the apex of heavy cruiser development. Suffren was one of the first ones, so in this case she would be worse. But Suffren has a 32 knot speed, so we actually drop a few knots, but we get 4 twin 8-inch guns, so an increase in firepower. 8 single 90 millimeter guns, and then 2 triple 550 millimeter torpedo tubes, and 3 aircraft. So a pretty good start. Algerie has different secondaries. I'm pretty sure. I think she has 4-inch, actually. 6 4-inch? 6 twin 4-inch, maybe. Regardless, she also has the triple torpedo tubes, the 4 twin 8-inch guns. I think she is faster than 32 knots, though. So again, you would have an improvement. Going forward as well, similar to Algerie, when there is already a ship that's like a prism event, whatever you want to call it, that's in the game, when I actually make the tech tree line, I do keep that ship in mind as well. So for example, Algerie is better than Suffren, even though they're pretty similar. And then when we do the Italian cruisers, so there's Zara as well. We do the German destroyers, there's Z1. I have kept those in mind as well. So you're not making a ship that's already better than the one that's a special ship at the tier that the special ship is at. I'll explain that more. It'll make more sense when it actually comes to German destroyers. We'll get there in a moment. But Suffren, yep, pretty good starter for the heavy cruisers. And the next we have St. Louis, which is the epitome of French cruiser design, but it was never actually constructed. Remember, this is also where we start getting gun reload booster. So we have 33 knot speed, 3 triple 8-inch guns, so in the same kind of setup as the light cruisers, but you just have 8-inch guns now. 5 twin 100 millimeter guns, so the secondary range caliber is still increasing. And then 2 triple 550 millimeter torpedoes, that's a mainstay of the entire line, and 3 aircraft. This is going to be pretty good. You're going to start seeing a lot of anti-aircraft increase as well. Next is a paper ship, Marseille. 33.5 knots, 3 triple 203 millimeter guns, more secondaries with 7 twin 100 mils, and the same torpedoes and aircraft, but increased AAs, things like that. Better dispersion. And then lastly, we have Versailles. 35 knots, 3 triple 240 millimeter guns, so just over 9-inch guns. I think they're 9.2s actually. And then 6 twin 127, so 6 twin 5-inch guns, which is actually pretty nasty when it comes to destroyers. And then 2 triple 550s with 4 aircraft. So let's take a look at all of these ships. Bougainville, here you go. You have 2 guns at the front, 1 astern, nothing really to write home about, but you do get that plane right after the second smokestack. So again, just for laughs, it's really not going to make or break the game, I promise you. It's kind of like the Katori fighter. There's nothing at tier 1.6 or 2.0 that can really do anything about it. But it's there, so might as well just have it too. Next is Jardin de la Gravière. It's a protected cruiser from the 1900s there. As you can see, it's kind of got a mix of different guns pretty much everywhere. I have 3 on either beam, and then 1 directly facing forward, and then 1 directly astern. And this is another picture of her here as well. So, kind of like a St. Louis, except you're also kind of not, but you have the same kind of idea. And there's another picture of her as well. Next is Pluton. Like I said, there are other options for tier 3 cruisers, but I specifically like this one, so I'm going to try and stick with it. You have 2 guns facing forward and 2 guns facing aft, and that's all you got. No torpedoes, even though you would think she would have them, considering how much midships room she has, but she does not. But it's a nice looking ship, nice and sleek, kind of looks like the higher tier French cruisers that we will eventually see. So it kind of gives the player an intro to what they would expect. There's a picture for there. Better one. Next we have Duguay Trouin. So you can kind of see how you have the 2 twin guns facing forward, 2 twin guns facing aft, And then you have a bunch of torpedo tubes. You can't really see them in this picture because they were removed at some part during the war and replaced with more AA. But I would like her to keep her torpedo tubes because that'd be very nice. And there she is as well. You can actually see her torpedo tubes in this picture, so that's nice. Pretty straightforward light cruiser. Leanders, Omahas, Karlsruhes, she'd be going up against those, Königsbergs even. So she'd fit in pretty nice. And then we start getting into the more modern cruisers with Emile Bertin. So 2 triples facing forward, 1 triple facing back. Yeah, that one single 90 mil, the twin on the back there. So it could be funny if you make that like a Katori secondary or a Trafalgar secondary where it's there for laughs, but that's about it. And then torpedo tubes and midships as well. There's a picture of her. Pretty nice drawing or picture. It's hard to tell actually with that one. Then we have La Galissonière, so the most advanced light cruiser that was constructed there. 2 triples facing forward, 1 triple facing back. This time you have the 90 mils on amidships, so you have 2 on each side. So those would actually be pretty good secondaries. And then torpedoes as well, right between the 90 mils as well. You can see here that they are twins, but again, it's not so far-fetched just to make them triples, make it even out. Then, after La Galissonière, as you can kind of see a little bit more for protection here and everything. There's a picture there. And another picture. Okay. Suffren. So this is where we start getting to the heavy cruisers. Same kind of layout as Duguay Trouin, but you have a lot bigger guns, so they're going to hit a lot harder. Now, they are going to be, what is this, tier 7? Let me go back. Yeah, tier 7. So, tier 7 is not necessarily known for having very strong ships. You're going to have, let's see, well, you have New Orleans, you have Myoko, so you have like the 1930s interwar ships. So you're going to have some that are stronger than others, but it's like a time period of experimentation. So in this case, we have the French with this design, where others were going with triples or we're going with more turrets. We kind of start out pretty basic, but that's all right. And this is another picture of her. This looks like a more advanced version, potentially, or more modernized. Regardless, you still have your strong firepower and the torpedo tubes if necessary. She would play very similar to Algerie. You just wouldn't be as good as Algerie because then there'd be no point to get Algerie. Here's another picture of her. Now we start getting into the paper ships. So this is St. Louis. We would still have the same 3 triple 8-inch gun turrets that we will see in the rest of the, or at least in the tier 9 as well. But tier 8, we have 2 of them facing forward, 1 facing back, and then we have a bunch of smaller 90 mils as well. As you can see pretty much everywhere that there's room. And then some torpedo tubes right under the deck amidships. This would be a pretty good ship, and this is where we would start getting the gun reload booster. We would have quite a few guns to actually make use of that reload booster as well. And that's kind of what she would look like potentially. And then lastly, we have Versailles. Nope, I stand corrected. Marseille. So Marseille would have the same kind of firepower, except she'd have a few more of the 90 mils, or actually I think they're 100 mils. Yeah, so these would actually be 100 mils. But the same kind of layout, again, more increased AA, and you would get the gun reload booster. And then lastly, we would finish with Marseille. Marseille would get access to the larger caliber guns, 240 millimeter guns, so they'd hit harder. They're about 9-inch guns, 6 twin 127 mils, and then you also have 2 triple torpedo tubes as well. So she's also going 35 knots. So she's a very fast, very hard-hitting heavy cruiser. She would definitely be one to be wary about at the higher tiers. She could, with the gun reload booster, she could take a lot of health away from battleships that are giving broadside, or she could completely one-shot cruisers if they also give broadside. So a nice little cruiser line here as well. Again, your main focus here is going to be firepower. So if you don't have fast shooting 6-inch guns, then you have 8-inch guns, which most part have a gun reload booster. Potentially good anti-aircraft as well, especially in the later ships. Your speed is going to be insane because you have the speed boost as well. And then just strong torpedoes too. So all in all, a nice little cruiser line for the French. Okay, next on our list is Germany, specifically German destroyers. So we have already talked about German destroyers a little bit in the first video I did on this a couple years ago. And there's really not many changes to that because you're kind of limited in what destroyers you can use in a tech tree, and you have basically just enough to get from tier 2 to tier 10, and that's fine. That just means it's pretty cut and dry. We do already have one German destroyer in the game. That is a new addition since I did my video. We have a Z1 in the game at tier 7. Now you will notice here that I actually have a Z5, which is a kind of an improved version of Z1 at tier 6. So there would be a little bit of manipulation in terms of like torpedo range or gun reload. Probably torpedo range because Z1 has like 9 km torpedoes or something like that, which is actually really good. So having lower torpedo range for like 6, 7, and 8 would make it so Z1 still has a place to be a prism ship because she would have that increased torpedo range. Now, if we actually look at the rest of them, we have a V25 at 33.5 knots, 3 single 88mm guns, 2 twin and 2 single 500mm torpedo tubes. We have a G101 at tier 3, 33.5 knots, 4 single 88mm guns, 2 twin, 2 single 500 mils torpedo tubes. V170 at tier 4, so we get an increase in speed at 35 knots. We keep the same number of guns, but we increase the caliber to 4 single 4-inch guns, 2 twin, and 2 single 500mm guns. Now, for these first 3 destroyers, you have the 2 twins centered, or 2 twin torpedo tubes centered on, well, the center line near the stern, or astern midships, I should say. But the 2 singles are actually right next to the bridge, one on either side, and they actually give you the ability to fire forward at pretty decent arcs, actually. If anyone's familiar with these destroyers from World of Warships, you know what I'm talking about. You just kind of do a little wiggle from side to side, and you can launch both of your single torpedoes. And considering they're single torpedoes, they actually reload relatively quickly as well. So you can just, one of my favorite attacks when I used to play that game was I would just head directly at an enemy and go left to right, and let's say I'd shoot the torpedo from the left side, and then I turn towards the left so I could bring the right torpedo tube to bear, and I'd shoot the right one, and then by the time I turned back to the right to expose the left torpedo tube, it was already reloaded again. So you would just keep doing like this little snake wiggle and launching torpedoes the entire time. It was one of the best things ever. And that's kind of what I would want for these as well. The damages for these torpedoes, probably not the highest. They're not going to be like Japanese torpedoes, but a pretty decent reload rate, pretty average or slightly below average damage. Be nice. We'll talk about more of why the German destroyers have perks in other places. Next, we have T-22. We do drop in speed to 32.5. That can be adjusted, though, probably to like 34 or so if you really wanted to. 4 single 4-inch guns, and now we have 2 triple 21-inch torpedo tubes. So we keep the same guns, but we get more torpedoes, and they're bigger torpedoes. These are, however, all in the center line, so no more forward-firing torpedoes for the rest of the destroyer line. After that, we go to Z5, which we've already talked about a little bit. It's very similar to the design of Z1, actually. So if you know what that looks like, then just think of that for right now. 35 knots, 5 single 128 millimeter guns, or just about 5.1, not 5, yeah, 5-inch guns. And then 2 quad 21-inch torpedo tubes. So increase in gun caliber and torpedoes. Next, at Tier 7 is a Z-23. Now this is an interesting destroyer. 36 knots, but it has 1 twin and 3 single 149 millimeter guns, which is a 5.9-inch gun. Yes, this thing has 6-inch guns and also 2 quad torpedo tubes. However, with the increased firepower, you would also have increased reload, but also increased damage. So it's kind of like a very small light cruiser, or kind of, you can call it a scout cruiser, honestly. But on a destroyer hull. It's the only one that has this kind of gun caliber because it was actually pretty unsuccessful during the wartime, and they never repeated this armament on an actual wartime destroyer until later designs. But I added it in just for some variation. At Tier 7, you have a lot of variation at Tier 7 between battleships, carriers, cruisers, even destroyers. It's a really good place that there's a lot of options to choose from, so giving a high caliber destroyer would add more variation. So I think that's a good spot for it. Then we'll go to Tier 8 at Z35. You're going to see this one is very similar to the Tier 6 one. We go 36 knots, have 5 single 128 millimeter guns. Again, we revert back to what we had, and 2 quad 533 millimeter guns. So not only do we get 1 more knot of speed, but she would also have increased anti-aircraft defense. That is the main difference with the Tier 8. Going to the Tier 9, or the 8.9 Z46, this is when we actually start getting the twin turrets for the 128s. So we go a little bit faster at 37.5 knots, 3 twin 128 millimeter guns. These are actually arranged with 1 turret in the front and 2 turrets in the back, pretty much like your standard Japanese destroyer. And then we have 2 quad torpedo tubes as well. And then the height is Tier 10, or 9.6. For Z52, we have the same speed, same armament, same torpedoes, except the guns are arranged with 2 turrets in the front, 1 turret in the back, and obviously increased anti-aircraft defense once more. Now, consumables. All of these would get smokescreen. Whatever duration that would be up to whatever Naval Creed decides. Right now, Z1 does not have smokescreen, actually, but it does get torpedo reload booster, which would help. And that's something that these destroyers would not have, because I would have them with speed boost all the way through, mainly because they have pretty mediocre speeds. They're not anything blazingly fast until you're kind of getting into like Tier 7 through 10 or so. But for Tiers 5 through 10, we would have the same thing that Z1 does. It would have hydroacoustic search, which would make it a very good detector of torpedoes and also detector of ships and smoke screens. Yes, I understand how strong a smoke hydro destroyer could be. You can literally sit in your own smoke screen, turn on your hydroacoustic search, and find other destroyers before they can proxy detect you. Yes, I understand that. However, they are kind of balanced by the fact that they don't have nearly as many torpedoes as other destroyers would at the higher tiers. For example, Gearing has 10, Somers has 12, Shimakaze has 15, you have 8 still. So having lower damage torpedoes, faster reloading torpedoes, but also kind of like British destroyer torpedo range would kind of mean you'd be more of a destroyer hunter and potentially a gun spammer versus an actual torpedo destroyer focused main. So I got pictures of all of these. Let's start with V25 here. Again, we have the 388 mils. So these are actually larger than the 76s that Sakura has. So I'd actually expect these to be pretty decent and not shatter nearly as often as Sakura. The main issue with Sakura guns is that if you use HE, you're gonna shatter because you can't pen pretty much anything. But if you use armor piercing, then you have too much pen, and you just overpen everything, even destroyers. Um, so yeah, 88s would probably negate that shattering effect. So these would be pretty good. You got one gun in the front, one amidships, and one in the stern. You can see the two twin torpedoes right after the last funnel. And then if you look right under the first gun, you can actually see one of the two single torpedo tubes facing directly forward as well. One thing I have also found with this ship while playing Naval Creed years ago is that this ship is so low to the water, as you can see here. It has like 0 freeboard, that it actually makes it a very stealthy target and also very hard to hit target once you do detect it, because there's so little of the ship to hit. So that's also an advantage for it as well. There's a picture of her. Not all of these pictures are going to be great, but I did try to get the best quality ones I could. Okay, next we have G101. So kind of a similar design. We are longer. We have one gun in the front, one gun between the second and third funnels, and then two kind of surrounding the amidships or the aft deck house there. Again, two twins right aft of the last funnel, and two single torpedo tubes right underneath the crane right there. So a little bit longer of a ship, so less maneuverable, but again, we do have the same kind of firepower plus one more gun, which you would only be able to use on a broadside. But you know what? It's actually not terrible. Though actually, if you have a stern chase, you can only use one gun versus V25, which could potentially use two if it could shoot past the aft mast. But we'll see. There's a picture of G101. Next we have V170. So kind of have the same kind of layout, except we have bigger guns now. So we have one in the front, two surrounding the second funnel, and one at the stern. These are 4-inch guns though, so these will pack a punch. And at tier 4, you're going to want some gunpowder, because now we're starting to get into some pretty decent destroyers. The cruisers starting to get a little bit stronger with like Omahas and Leanders, and the battleships are also getting pretty strong too. So gunpowder to stat fires would be very nice. And then you have the two twin torpedo tubes after the second funnel, and the two singles right abreast of the first funnel there. At this point, the torpedoes may start getting a little bit outclassed, mainly because you are keeping the same armament as the tier 2. It will change next year, but the torpedoes on V170 could be a tad disappointing depending on their range increase from tier 2, their damage increase from tier 2, things like that, because you can't increase the number of torpedoes and you can't increase the caliber. You can only change like speed, damage, and range, but you don't really want to change them too much because it's still a tier 4. And there's a picture of V170 as well. You can see the single torpedo tubes better in this picture. You can see them right next to the bridge there. Next we would, we got one more picture of V170. There you go. Now we have T-22. So these are slightly more modernized destroyers. This is actually a torpedo boat, I'm pretty sure. We have one gun in the front, one gun just forward of the second funnel, and then two facing rearwards, with two triple torpedo tubes, one after each funnel. So no more forward firing torpedo tubes, but we already knew that. You can see the anti-aircraft mounts here, so we're actually going to get some okay, well, at least noticeable anti-aircraft, I would say. The first 3 destroyers would practically be 0, which is pretty much par of the course for destroyers at low tiers, but whatever. But at this tier 5, we would start seeing like Shohos and Bogues and Eagles. So definitely a little bit stronger of aircraft carriers, or at least something strong enough to endanger the team. So knocking down a few planes would definitely help, and they don't carry that many anyways. Going back to the ship, in World of Warships, these are actually 360-degree turning turrets. If you turn them all the way around, the barrels go like point at the sky to avoid objects, and then when they're on a bearing that they can shoot, the gun barrels would drop back down. I would actually not want that for this ship. Yes, it was fun, but no other destroyer in the tech tree line would do that. So it would not make any sense to have the player think, oh, yeah, this is how the guns are going to be for the rest of the line, when it's really not. So I would just have them turn normally. And if they can't shoot, then they would have to turn all the way around. Simple as that. Again, she is only historically had a speed of 32.5 knots. That could be increased for game balancing purposes, but that would honestly be the only thing I would increase, and honestly not by much, because tier 5, 34 is pretty okay actually. You're not the fastest still, but 32.5 will not catch some ships. Like some battleships will still outrun you at that point. There's a picture of V25. You can see how high those gun barrels get, especially on the number 1 turret there. So that kind of adds to the 360-degree turret thing I was telling you about. Again, would not recommend that. All right, now we have a Z5. So as you can see here, pretty much a cut and dry Z1 that's already in the game. So you have the two 128mm guns in the front and the three 128s on the aft deck house and on the stern. So kind of like a Fletcher design, believe it or not. Again, Z1's already in the game. We can't really make the tech tree ship stronger than the prism ship, because then there'd be no reason to buy the prism ship. So decreased torpedo range, potentially decreased gun damage, though honestly I'm pretty disappointed with Z1 gun damage, so I'd probably just keep that the same, honestly. No sense in making it worse or better at that point. So a lot of changes to torpedoes would be the balancing factor there. Also, one thing I forgot to say is T-22 would be the destroyer where we would start getting the hydroacoustic search. So that would be very good for it as well. It'd be a nice little destroyer hunter. Rapid firing 4-inch guns too. And then Z5 is where we get the 5-inch guns. So more damage, but slower reload and gun traverse there. But pretty good destroyer, honestly. Z1's not bad in the game at all. She doesn't turn very well. But again, if you want a maneuverable destroyer, you're going to want to go British or American. So there's that. There's a Z21. Next, we would have a Z23. So this is the one, like I said, that has the strange kind of gun layout for the 149mm guns, or the 5.9s. We're specifically looking at this bottom one here. You can see we have one twin turret on the bow, and then 3 single guns on the aft deck house there, with the 2 quad torpedo tubes amidships. Why this wasn't really a historically good ship was because these guns were so heavy, especially the twin mount on the bow, that it just, instead of cutting through the waves, it would dig the bow into the waves and slow it down considerably, and also put a lot of stress on the hull. And German destroyers, not necessarily known for being the most unbreakable destroyers. They broke down a lot. But we would have some really strong firepower at tier 7, which would also be the tier where Z1 is at. So you could either have a really good destroyer with the 5-inch guns and torpedoes, or you could choose the tech tree one, which would have the 6-inch guns, which would be worse, but they'd hit harder. So again, options. That is one thing I like in this game, is options. I don't like copycat ships. If you're going to make a ship, make it different from one that's already in the game, even if it's just a little bit. I'm looking at Benson and what's the other one we have? I haven't played it. Laffey. Like those ships, there's a difference of 100-meter range in gun range, and that is it. So there's really no point in getting Laffey unless you really like Benson. So again, really don't like copycat ships, so this would make or give some more variation to tier 7 there. Again, with speed boost and hydro as well. There's a picture of her. You can see just how large that turret is on the bow, and you can kind of understand why it got really heavy. All right, next we have Z35. So we kind of revert back to the way that Z1 and Z5 would look like, with the 128mm guns, 2 in the front, 3 in the stern, and the 2 quads and midships there for torpedoes. a little bit of increase in speed, but again, increased anti-aircraft defense. It's not going to be the strongest in the world, I get that, but still it's tier 8, which means we're seeing Lexingtons, Saratogas, Enterprises, Kagas. So some really big carriers are coming out at this tier. So having more anti-aircraft defense will not help you stay alive, but will still help shoot down some planes. So that's there. And there's a picture of her as well. And now we have Z23. Nope, that's incorrect. Z46. So this one also has 128 millimeter guns. As you can see, she has one turret forwards and two turrets astern. Kind of like a Garo or a Shimakaze, almost. She has the two quad torpedo tubes centered amidships. That's, as you can tell, it's a pretty common thing at this point, starting from tier 5. So it's nice to have consistency there. But these guns, this is, what is it, like the 6th ship or something like? No, the 3rd. The 3rd ship with 5-inch guns. So at this point, like, the technology is better, the rate of fire is better, things like that. And you're getting 6 guns. So that is a lot for tier 9. Let's see what else has 6 guns at tier 9. Well, actually, there's a couple ships that have 8 guns. You have Akazuki that has 8, but those are only 4-inch guns. You have Ukikaze, which has 6 guns. You have Porter, which has 8 5-inch guns. So, I mean, it's not going to be the biggest gun ship, but it's still going to be pretty nice. I will guarantee you that. Those torpedoes are all going to be nice. Smoke hydro, yet again. More anti-aircraft, always welcome. There's a picture of that. And lastly, we have Z52. So this would be the pinnacle of the German destroyer line. So she would have the best guns, the best torpedoes, kind of potentially the best anti-aircraft, probably the worst detection. That's just a standard things with destroyers. As you go through the tech tier or tech tree, the bigger they get, the worse their concealment. But that makes sense. But yeah, we have 2 twin guns in the front and 1 astern. So it's a very much better layout than the Z46 there. And we still have the 2 quad torpedo tubes centered midships. At this point, they would have pretty okay damage. I wouldn't expect them to be able to one-shot some battleships like H-42. I don't think there's many destroyers that can one-shot that with torpedoes. But yeah, good reload. Potentially the fastest reloading torpedoes here. That is something that the World of Warships destroyers or German destroyers have, is really fast reloading torpedoes, but they don't do a lot of damage. But we could figure that out later on. I'm just trying to figure out ships for right now. Anti-aircraft, again, not going to be the best, but you could still knock down a handful of planes. It'd probably be similar to like Daring a lot. This is pretty close to Daring. Less maneuverability, but you get hydro. The guns would be very similar as well. Torpedoes, pretty similar. Things like that. And yeah, that would be everything I would have for German destroyers. So V25 all the way through Z52. You have a smattering of 88 mils, 105s, 128s. You have the one single destroyer with 149s. All of them have pretty standard torpedoes all the way through, and smoke, speed boost, and hydroacoustic search. Pretty cool. Now that we've gone over German destroyers, next we would actually have Italian destroyers. Kind of going in line of countries that the way they appear in Naval Creed. So like Japan, America, France, Germany, Italy, Pan-Asia, Russia, Britain, and then I have a couple more countries after that. So that is the order I'm following if you haven't figured that out yet. But we have Italian destroyers. Now, before we start, you will notice that they have pretty small guns, not a lot of guns, and even less torpedoes. But they are hella fast, and that is going to be one of their advantages. So let's just take a look to see what my predictions are here. So we will start with a tier 2 at Palestro. Pretty slow, 32 knots, but we already start out with 4-inch guns, 4 of them. And believe it or not, these are actually the smallest guns that of the entire tech tree line would get. Technically, there are two 76mm guns as well. I would not probably use them as secondaries, though. Probably just anti-aircraft. And you have two twin 450mm torpedo tubes. So, not a lot. I understand that. Two twins. That's very similar, actually, to Naval Creed, though. Four single 4-inch guns, and then the two twin torpedo tubes. So I think Naval Creed has 456s. I did talk about her, but it's been a couple days since I recorded that part of the video, so I don't remember. But yeah, so pretty standard starting destroyer, nothing too exceptionally strong. And then we'll go to tier 3 for Sella, 35 knots, so big speed increase there. Two twin 120mm guns. Now these twin 120mm guns, you're going to be seeing a lot of those for the Italian destroyers and the cruisers. Mainly the destroyers, though. So we have two twin 120s and two twin 21-inch torpedo tubes. So again, we keep two twins, but they are larger in caliber, so they will hit harder. Next, we go to tier 4 for turbine. We have 36 knots, so a little bit more speed. Two twin 120s and two triple 21-inch torpedo tubes. So the same guns, but more torpedoes. Now at tier 4, that's going to be nice. But again, a lot of these destroyers are only going to have about 4 guns or so. We do have an exception at tier 5 with Navigatori, 38 knots, so really actually fast at this point. Three twin 120mm guns, so that's nice. A lot of good gun power there. But we do drop down in torpedoes to two twin 21-inch torpedo tubes. So you gain a gun, actually you gain a couple guns, but you lose a couple torpedoes. So she would be more of a gunboat at that point. So give or take, kind of. But we do revert back with Dardo at tier 6, 38 knots, two twin 120s, and then back to the two triple 20-inch torpedo tubes. Now, a lot of these armaments for Italian destroyers are going to be very similar. So again, similar to the German destroyers, the main difference would be in gun capabilities, torpedo capabilities, and anti-aircraft defense. Potentially maneuverability as well. Tier 7, we have Maestrale, 38 knots, two twin 120s, two triple torpedo tubes. Pretty standard. You can see it's a repetition of the same armaments, but the destroyers themselves would get stronger, not necessarily different. Tier 8, we have Soldati, 38 knots, two twin and one single 120mm guns. We get 5 guns now at tier 8, which is pretty nice. Kind of like a Benson almost. And then two triple 533mm torpedo tubes. At tier 8.9 is when we actually start seeing differences. For CM D'Oro, there's a long name. I just write it like that because it's really long. It's like Comandante Megdalo D'Oro, something like that. I think I have a picture of it later on. 39 knots. So again, we keep the blisteringly fast pace of destroyers here. 4 single 135mm guns. So these are like 5.2, 5.3-inch guns. So pretty big caliber. They would have increased damage, except they would also not shoot nearly as fast as the 120s, and the gun traverse would be pretty slow as well. And two triple torpedo tubes, because that's the trend. Lastly, we have Capitani Romani. Now, I actually really like this ship. It technically was counted as a light scout cruiser, but it could also be portrayed as a really big destroyer, depending on which way you lean. In my case, I see it as a destroyer. So it goes 40 knots, so again, really fast. 4 twin 135mm guns, so we're doubling the armament of tier 9. And we get 2 quad torpedo tubes. So the first time we're seeing anything other than a triple or a twin. So pretty strong all around. Now, if we look at the consumables, we have smoke for all of them. This could be like a crawling smoke, like the British destroyers, because that'd be interesting. But I didn't necessarily choose any which smoke it would be. I just said smoke. And then for the second consumable, you could either get torpedo reload booster, considering you don't have many torpedoes. So if you have a torpedo reload booster, you could reload them faster and get more torpedoes on the way. So instead of sending 6, you could send 12. Or you could get a gun reload booster. If you don't want to focus on torpedoes, since there's not that many of them, you could focus on your guns, which again, there's not that many of them, but they're going to be pretty rapid fire. So if you do a gun reload booster, you would have a little bit of time to, get more shells down the range. Now, I do think this would only work with a rework of the gun reload booster. The ones the French have right now are actually pretty disappointing. You fire, you press the consumable, and it takes a set amount of time off of your reload for one salvo only. It works, but it could be better. If you do what World of Warships does and says, hey, during this time frame of like 30 seconds or something, your reload, all of your gun reload is reduced during this time, no matter how many shells or fires you send out. So that would work more for the destroyers, because you don't want to fire one salvo, have a 5 or 4 second reload, press the gun reload booster, have that reload disappear, fire again, but then that's all you get. Because at that point, the gun reload booster is worthless and you're just going to go for torpedo reload booster. But if you have it like, oh, okay, for the next 10 seconds or so, your reload is now 1 second for all of your guns, that's going to be very much different. And you can get a lot of shells downrange, start like some fires, or you just mess up a destroyer's day, even work over a cruiser pretty well. So again, this would only work with a rework of the gun reload booster, but it could be done. It definitely could be done. All right, so let's look at some pictures of these ships. So Palestro, kind of small. You have some guns. Yeah, nothing too special there. Pretty standard starting destroyer. It says it has 4 guns, but I can only see 3 in this picture. I don't think one of them is not a twin. So there's another gun hiding here somewhere. But you have a couple 76 mil anti-aircraft guns as well, and then the 2 twin 450s. And there's a picture of her. Next we have Quintino Sella. I just have her as Sella because that's going to be easier. Sella, 35 knots. You see the 2 twin guns there, one fore, one aft, and then the 2 twin torpedo tubes amidships there. Pretty small destroyer, but pretty tall destroyer. So probably high detectability, but also probably pretty okay maneuverability. Notice that none of these destroyers have a speed boost. So unlike the French, where they have fast speed and a speed boost, these simply just have fast speed. But potentially more maneuverability over the French, because you go 54 knots in Mogador, it's going to take you the entire map to turn around at full speed. But yeah, so there's Sella. They're pretty nice little destroyers as well. Not much to complain about there. Also, with Tier 3, having 2 guns facing forward is going to be an advantage. As of right now, the only destroyer in game at Tier 3 is Wix, and you kind of have to turn your ship a little bit to get more than 1 gun on target, and even then it's only 2. So, again, a little bit of an advantage there. Here's Turbine, so a little bit longer, but the same armament, minus the fact we get triple torpedoes tubes now, so pretty strong there. The one well-aimed shot towards the amidships torpedo tubes could knock both of them out. So that is a downside. And there's a picture of her. Now we start getting into the more modern destroyers. So Navigatori here. We have 1 twin 120 on the fore, 1 twin 120 on the aft, and then you can actually see one right between the 2 funnels there, closer to the second funnel. And then underneath the little catwalks, you can see the 2 twin torpedo tubes. But we are insanely fast at 38 knots. So instead of really focusing on torpedoes, you can just be a really, really fast gunboat. And this is also when we start getting the gun reload booster. So that would be exceptionally strong. In fact, you actually might want to only get that at Tier 6. But that can be figured out another time. Again, torpedo reload booster would actually help this destroyer if you chose to go that route, because unless you only want to send 4 torpedoes to a target, you could reload that with a consumable and potentially get 8, which would be very improved. We start getting some okay-ish, or at least noticeable anti-aircraft at this point as well. Next we have Dardo. So we kind of cut back a little. We lose that third turret, but we also get the triple torpedo tubes back. And a kind of a smaller silhouette as well. Navigatore is a pretty large destroyer there, you can see here. And this one's more cut down. So potentially the same concealment as the Tier 5. We'll see. I didn't actually do any numbers for concealment or armaments or anything like that. Pretty much just what I expect the ship to be at this tier, what its speed is, what its main gun is, secondaries, and torpedoes, and aircraft, and consumables I could expect to see too. I didn't go into much more depth than that. So here's Dardo, pretty straightforward. Same kind of layout too, one gun forward, one gun aft, torpedo tubes amidships. And there's her again. All right, Maestrel. So you're gonna, it's hard to notice a lot of differences or point them out because there's really no differences. Like I said, it's going to be differences in the gun capabilities, torpedo capabilities or stats, and the ship itself and anti-aircraft. So we're going to get more health. The speed's still 38 knots. We still have two twin 120s. We still have two triple 533s for torpedoes. But other things can change. Rate of fire for guns, damages potentially, torpedo range, damage, rate of fire. Those things would change for these destroyers. Not a lot of freeboard there either, so potentially a harder target to hit unless you're shooting right for the bridge area. Alright, and here we have Soldati. So you have a twin in the front, a twin in the back, and that little amidships platform actually has a third gun. It's only a single, and that's between the two torpedo tubes there. But you know what? 5 guns is still going to be better than 4, though the angles would be questionable, but still. Torpedo reload booster, gun reload booster, triple torpedoes, pretty good. And there's Soldati. This was actually the most advanced Italian destroyer. That was actually a wartime destroyer. The other two, well, because Romani was classified as a light cruiser, and the CM d'Oro was laid down but never completed. And this is the Comandante. As you can see from up top, they have really long names, and that is why I just kind of make it a CM d'Oro. But definitely difference in gun caliber there. Those are very much larger turrets. Like those are the 135s. So those will definitely pack a punch, especially on light cruisers and broadside targets of any sort. You can see there it goes technically 35 knots, but for bouncing purposes, I'm going to make her go 39 because it would make no sense to have 4 ships in a row go 38, drop down to 35, and then go back up to 40 for the tier 10. So just making a 39 is a nice little balancing act, I guess you can say. But pretty nice looking destroyer. You can see all the little anti-aircraft guns amidships as well. So a little bit better AA, but nothing spectacular. I don't really see these as anti-aircraft destroyers by any means. They'd be probably a little bit better than Japanese destroyers, besides Akazuki. But that'd be about it. So nothing too strong there. They could be quite stealthy, though, considering how low they look to the water. And then we have Capitano Romani. Again, pretty nice looking ship, still classified as a somewhat light cruiser, but with only 135mm guns, it's kind of a stretch to say that as well. Yeah, because we have destroyers with 130mm guns that, like the Russians had. It's a little bit of a gray area. In this case, I would see her as a destroyer. You'd have 2 twin guns forward, 2 twin guns facing aft, and under those little catwalks there, you can see the 2 quad torpedo tubes. So kind of protected from air attack as well. A lot of anti-aircraft here, but again, probably not a lot of damages. The main drawback of this ship is that she's really tall and she's going to be really big. So not exactly what you would want from a destroyer, but again, this is some pretty strong firepower. So if you just treat yourself like a light cruiser instead of a destroyer, then you're a light cruiser without a citadel, and that in itself gives you an advantage. Again, with the smoke, the torpedo reload booster, the gun reload booster, this would be one really, really strong ship, guaranteed. And there's a picture of her. So, yep, Italian destroyers, pretty much copycat armaments the entire way through, but you're going to rely on your speed and your guns themselves because you don't have a lot of torpedoes. Changes could be made to the consumables. There definitely could be improvements, I think, but overall, pretty straightforward. Pretty fun little gunboats. Okay, now we're going to take a look at the Italian cruisers. Now, the Italian cruisers are going to be a little bit different from what you would normally find. Similar to the French, it's going to be a mix of light cruisers and heavy cruisers as we go through the tech tree. But we're also going to have interesting consumables for a cruiser, and we're also going to have interesting torpedoes that we really haven't seen a lot in the game, but can definitely be done. So let's start off by taking a look at what we have. First, we will start with a Eritrea. That's a tier 1 gunboat, so nothing special. 20 knots, 2 twin 120s. So again, very similar to the Italian destroyer line. So you have your first taste of 120mm guns there. No secondaries, no torps, no aircraft. Next we go to tier 2 Nino Bixio. 27.5 knots, so pretty impressive speed. We have 6 single 120mm guns, 6 single 76 mils. That could be secondaries. Probably would be at this tier, and 2 single 450mm torpedo tubes. These are probably submerged, however I did not make a note of that. So underwater torpedo tubes, and you'll see that a lot. Next we go through to tier 3 Bari. It's actually an ex-German cruiser from World War I that was handed as reparations to the Italians, but it's still a pretty good tier 3 cruiser. 27.5 knots, so same speed, but 8 single 6-inch, or technically 5.9-inch guns, or 149 mils, and then 2 single 500mm torpedo tubes, again probably submerged. It's these smaller torpedo tubes, as I've mentioned before in other parts of this video, they're there on the ship, but you don't have to have them. There's already examples of ships in game that historically had torpedoes, but in game they do not, as a balancing factor. And that's completely fine. I'm not saying you have to have torpedoes on every ship. I'm just saying that if you wanted to add torpedoes on these early ships, you could. But probably not for tier 2 or tier 3. Tier 4 is when we actually start getting into the more modernized cruisers. Alberto di Guisano, 36.5 knots, so fast speed again. The Italians are going to be very fast ships all around, if you could not tell already. 4 twin 6-inch guns, or 152s. You have 3 twin 100mm guns, secondaries, and 2 twin 533mm torpedoes. These are not submerged, and these, in fact, are on deck in 2 twin mounts. And you get 2 aircraft, so that's cool. Nothing special about the aircraft here, by the way. Just fighters. Next, at tier 5, we have Raimondo Montecuccoli, 37 knots, so again, pretty fast. And she's actually going to be the fastest cruiser of the Italians. 4 twin 6-inch guns, 3 twin 100 mils, 2 twin 533s. So the same kind of armament, but you do have a bigger ship, faster speed, and more anti-aircraft defense. So those are the bonuses there. Duca d'Aosta, tier 6, 36.5 knots. Again, 4 twin 6-inch guns. At this point, it's actually really hard to find a cruiser that did not have this at this time, because the one ship I'd love to have here is actually already in the game. Can't think of the name at the moment. Oh, but it's the light cruiser that has the 2 triples and the 2 twin 5-inch guns. The really fun Italian cruiser. That one would be perfect. However, I don't really like copycat ships, and so I chose something else instead. Something that is a little bit worse. So unfortunately, that's what we have. If you want to put the 2 triple and 2 twin Cantatari class, go for it. But this would be a different ship that's not in the game, which is what I'm looking for. So Duque d'Aosta, 36.5 knots, 4 twin 6-inch guns, again 3 twin 100s, but we do get 2 triple 21-inch torpedo tubes, so that's nice. Tier 7, we have Trento, 36 knots, so slowing down a little bit, but you're still pretty fast for a cruiser, honestly, because if you look at American cruisers, there's only... is there any that gets past 33 knots? I don't think there is. They're pretty consistent with either 33 or 32.5 knots. So if, I mean, you're not the slowest cruiser here, and 36 knots is not anything to be ashamed of, guaranteed it. Here's where we start getting the heavy cruisers, though. We have 4 twin 8-inch guns, we have 8 twin 100mm guns, and 8 single 20-inch torpedo tubes. These would be 4 to a side, like broadside torpedoes, and they would be underwater submerged. So harder to hit, but you also have a lot harder angles to shoot them from. And I think it would work, actually. It'd be pretty interesting to have those kind of torpedo tubes on heavy cruisers. Next, we go to Tier 8 Bolzano, which is pretty much the epitome of wartime heavy cruisers. 36 knots, 4 twin 8-inch guns, 8 twin 4-inch guns, and again, the same kind of submerged torpedoes, but you would have increased anti-aircraft as well, and she just looks really nice. Bolzano is another really nice looking Italian cruiser. Next, we would go to paper ships at this point. I have renamed the Tier 9 Genoa, 36 knots, 3 triple 8-inch guns, 12 single 90mm guns, the same kind you would see on like Veneto or something, which are really, really strong. The ones on Veneto actually shoot armor piercing. That could be something that the Italian cruisers could do as well, is just have armor piercing secondaries, then make them a little bit excellent. I like that. I wouldn't want them to be armor piercing. That'd be neat. And then 2 triple torpedo tubes, so we lose the submerged torpedo tubes there. Again, 2 triples, not the strongest, guaranteed, but you know, it's a yellow mechanic, or if you just get a lucky shot there, who knows. And then the Tier 9.6 I would renamed Italia, 36.5 knots, so we gain a little bit of speed back, 4 triple 8-inch guns, so pretty strong actually, 12 single 90 mils, and 2 quad torpedo tubes. So overall, we're just increasing gun caliber. Secondaries is not really an issue, and torpedo tubes is... there's torpedoes, but they're not going to be the mainstay of these cruiser lines at all. Consumables. All of them would have a heal starting at Tier 4, and you could either get torpedo reload booster, so similar to Italian destroyers. You don't get many torpedoes, but if you wanted to make more use of them, you could buy a torpedo reload booster, or a British destroyer smoke, which is the short duration, but the movable smoke, so it's the one like the crawling smoke, you can move at half speed with it. This would make it the second cruiser line with smoke, but the British cruisers, specifically heavy and light, only have the stationary smokes where it releases it all and then it lasts for quite a long time, but you also can't move very much in that time. So this would give it a different cruiser line smoke with different capabilities, which would make it more interesting as well. And with the Italians, your main, or one of your main advantages is speed, so you don't really want to give that up either. So that'd be very interesting to have a cruiser line with crawling smoke, kind of. So let's take a look at what these ships look like. Here's Eritrea, pretty straightforward, 2 twin guns, forward and aft. It's a Tier 1 cruiser, really not going to be anything special, guaranteed. There's a picture of her. Next is Nino Bixio. Now you can kind of see we have an interesting layout. We have 2 guns next to each other on the fore. You have 2 guns amidships on Echelon, and then you have 2 guns firing or super firing each other on the aft. So you have kind of a bit of every kind of gun layout there ever was designed in one ship, which would make it pretty interesting. And then again, technically does have 2 torpedoes, but again, you wouldn't really have to add them if you didn't want to. But they wouldn't make or break the game, so And there's her. Next we have Bari, which is the Ex-Plau German cruiser. And this has 8 single 149mm guns. So you would have, I think it's 4 amidships, 2 on either side, and then 2 facing forward and 2 facing back, right next to each other. No secondaries, and 2 single 500mm torpedo tubes. Again, you don't have to use them if you don't want to. And that's how she looked there. Yeah, you can kind of see in the stern guns right there. They are 2 right next to each other there. So actually in chasing actions, you could use 4 guns facing forward. And same thing with astern. So any actual, whether it's forward, astern, port, or starboard, you would be able to bring 4 guns to bear at any time. So that's pretty cool. All right, now we're starting to get to like the more modernized cruisers. Alberto de Guisano. You have the 4 twin 6-inch. You have the handful of smaller secondaries centered amidships, actually. And then you have the torpedo tubes right next to the second funnel, it looks like. These are only twins, so not the most, but hey, still torpedoes. You could laugh and send them at a destroyer or an unsuspecting destroyer, because that's always fun too, to torpedo a destroyer with something that's not a destroyer. I get a kick out of it all the time. Pretty nice looking ship though, actually, especially for tier 4. Pretty modern looking ship, because you have like Leander, you have Krasny Kavkaz, Omaha, ships like that, Kuma. This one looks slightly more modern, which is appreciated. Next we get to Raimondo Montecuccoli. So this is where we start getting the generic Italian cruiser looking ship. Long, sleek, not a lot of superstructure, wide spaced funnels, fast. It's the mainstay of Italian cruisers right here in a nutshell. So we have the same guns. We get the torpedoes centered amidships. The secondary is actually right after the second funnel, so they're all in the back. Kind of like a Kirov, actually. Nothing spectacular. 2 twin torpedoes as well, so again, nothing special. Before I go past it though, Guisano is actually the one that I would start getting the torpedo reload booster and the smoke screen. And that would follow through for the rest of the class, and the tech tree. So there's Montecuccoli again. Pretty sleek looking ship, not gonna lie. I'm really digging it. And it only gets better from there. We have Duca d'Aosta, so a little bit bigger of a ship. Faster, same guns, 4 twin 6-inch, same secondaries, all right behind the funnel there. And 2 triple torpedo tubes next to the aircraft catapult. Same kind of setup, but more AA. Again, different gun stats, torpedo stats, ship stats, things like that. There's a picture of her. Next, we're getting into the heavy cruisers. So there is already a heavy cruiser in the game, Zara. Nothing actually that spectacular about this ship. It has 4 twin 8-inch guns. I'm talking about Zara right now. But her secondaries are actually pretty okay-ish on lighter ships, believe it or not. You usually don't have a cruiser that's good with secondaries, but that is one of them. They're just kind of short-ranged. When it came to choosing whether I should go for Algerie or Zara, Zara is probably more tanky, but Algerie also has the backup of torpedoes and aircraft. No, they actually both get aircraft, but torpedoes as a last resort is going to be very nice. And that is where Trento comes in, because she has 36 knots, 4 twin 8-inch guns, 8 twin 100mm guns. You can see them all along the sides there. And 8 single submerged torpedo tubes. So you're not going to make or break Zara. You could definitely still have Zara be pretty good. But Trento would potentially be a little bit more advantageous, because you would have those torpedoes where Zara would not. But Zara would probably have better gun reload, better AA, better maneuverability, things like that. So to still make her a worthy ship to purchase, if you so wanted to. And there we go with Trento. And then Bolzano. Now, Bolzano would be a pretty good heavy cruiser as well. Tier 8 with only 8-inch guns. You are starting to get overpowered in terms of gun power. You're pretty similar to Hipper, actually, at this point. But even Hipper is only a 7.5. See what else we have at Tier 8. We have Albemarle for the British, who has 9 guns. You have Baltimore for the Americans with 9. You have Takao for the Japanese that have 10. So yeah, you're definitely starting to get outgunned at this point. But again, you're very fast. You have pretty okay secondaries. Again, if they're armor piercing, that'd be just another interesting aspect of this cruiser line. Armor piercing secondaries are really nice, and I really wish there was some more of them in the game. There's only like a handful of ships that have them. The Italian battleships being one of them. But yeah, again, 8 single submerged 21-inch torpedo tubes, but pretty nice all the way around. And then again, if you have your smoke screen, like the Italian cruisers would be predicted to have, then your decreased or diminished firepower for your main guns could kind of be counteracted, because if you're in a smoke screen, you're getting free shots pretty much, unless they're shooting back at you, blind firing. So be nice. And then again, your speed, you're blisteringly fast. So every other cruiser except Japanese, I think, would be slower than you. So that'd be an advantage too. You can mitigate what range you're shooting at. There's Bolzano as well. Again, just a really nice looking ship. Just gorgeous. Now we start getting into the paper ships. So this is a design for a 3 triple 8-inch gun Italian cruiser. Would name her Genoa. You can see the secondaries amidships. It does have torpedoes abreast of the second funnel there. They look like triples to me, so I have them as 2 triples. And these are on the deck, so they would have better arcs, but would be more vulnerable to fire as well. But having triple 8-inch guns would definitely be an improvement. It would be like Baltimore or Liverpool and ships like that. So definitely not slacking in gun power, but she is a pretty big target. So armor and concealment and anti-aircraft would actually be pretty important as well. It's something like she might look like right there. This is the one in World of Warships. It's Amalfi, I'm pretty sure it is. And then we would have the 4 triple 8-inch gun design. I've renamed it Italia. And you can see here it'd be a pretty large cruiser, but it could also be a pretty strong cruiser as well, with pretty fast speed, 4 triple 8-inch, 12 single 90 mils, as you can see centered amidships there, and 2 quad torpedo tubes next to the second funnel as well. So pretty nice overall. This is Brindisi in World of Warships, which is kind of on the same basis. You can see the torpedoes right there. You can see the 90 mils centered amidships, and then you have obviously your 8-inch guns as your main firepower. But a pretty nice looking ship overall. And so that is what I would think the Italian cruiser line would look like. Gun power, pretty standard overall, nothing too special. Secondaries, if you make them armor piercing secondaries, that just make it a neat little twist for the line itself. And we can see that the smaller secondaries for Veneto and Andrea Doria and Raphael, even the armor piercing 90 mils, they don't do a lot, but what they do is actually pretty decent for their gun caliber, because if it's anything smaller than a 4-inch, and sometimes even 4-inch guns just shatter on everything, and they are practically worthless at that point. And if you don't have the secondaries that the Italian battleships get, such as like the 6-inch guns, you're really not going to do much with your secondary. So making them armor piercing would be a little bit of fun. And who knows, make them a little brawling cruisers, though their armor wouldn't hand up to that. But you could definitely have some fun games. The submerged torpedo tubes, again, already in the game in the form of Weymouth and, like Frede de Gros or H39. Can be done, and I want to see more of those. So, yeah. And then the crawling smoke would just give a little bit more variation. I'm going to be repeating that a lot because no copycat destroyers here, or cruisers, or any other ship. And that'll be it for Italian cruisers. Okay, the next country to go over is Pan-Asia. So a lot of the ships, if not all the ships we have in the game right now for Pan-Asia, are actually Chinese ships, mainly so the developers can add ships from their home country, because who wouldn't want that? I can understand that. However, I can do them one better and actually give them a destroyer and a cruiser line that they could add. However, you do have to bear in mind that it's Pan-Asia, so it's other Asian countries other than Japan. So I have China, I have Thailand, India, Indonesia, and for this instance, I have counted Turkey as an Asian country. Now it's split between Europe and Asia, so you could either go either way. For me, I counted Turkey as an Asian country and not as a European country. So that is, it just makes it easier for me because there's really not many options to choose from for Pan Asia. But I did what I could with what I had available. So we're going to talk about Pan-Asian destroyers in this section of the video. But before that, we're going to be talking about one of their quirks, I guess you could say. And this is a Pan-Asian destroyer and a cruiser quirk. They would have deep water torpedoes. Now, if you're familiar with what those are in World Warships, good for you. For everyone else, these torpedoes would, air quotes here, theoretically run at a depth that would be too deep to hit destroyers, but could hit cruisers, battleships, and carriers because they have increased draft or depth that they are in the water, how deep they are in the water. To make up for the fact that they are not able to hit destroyers, they would have increased damage against cruisers, battleships, and carriers. So you kind of have a really strong weapon to use against those three classes, but only your guns to use against destroyers. So you're going to be really weak against destroyers because every other destroyer can launch torpedoes at you and hit you. But if you launch torpedoes at them, you wouldn't be able to hit the destroyer, the enemy opposing destroyer. So you're always going to be a disadvantage in destroyer fights, but anything else, if you stealth torpedo it, it's going to hurt. It's going to be like Japanese destroyer torpedoes, well, like 3/4 of a Japanese destroyer torpedo, just not able to hit destroyers. But your guns are going to be pretty okay. Your anti-aircraft is going to be pretty interesting, and these ships themselves are actually going to be pretty nice. So let's take a look to see what I think is going to be best. First, we start out with Lung Tuan, which is a Chinese destroyer, 30 speed, or 30 knot speed, 6 single 76mm guns. Yes, I know how much I gripe about the 76mm gun in Tachibana. However, I really don't have many options here. And again, having 6 of them is still more than Sakura, which only has 5. You can only fire 4 from each side, which would be the same for Lung Tuan. But you know what? Hey, you have it. It's a starting destroyer. You're going to play 2 games, promote it, and move on to the next one anyways. Again, with the torpedoes, you have pretty terrible armament as well. 2 single 450mm torpedo tubes. Yes, you only have 2 torpedoes. I understand that. And they will be deep water right off the bat. So you will not be able to torpedo any destroyers. But at tier 2, when you have slow Mikasas and Dantons and the occasional Kawachi as well, you should be able to do a pretty decent amount of damage to them. And that is pretty much what you're looking for in this ship, is torpedo power. And yes, it doesn't have a lot. I understand that. It's the best I got. But just know that that's actually probably going to be the worst one. Next, we have Phra Ruang from Thailand. Also, if I mispronounce any of these names, I apologize. I live in the United States. I don't have that much connection to outside cultural names and stuff like that. So this is just my interpretation of what I think they would be. Feel free to correct me if you want to in the comments. Phra Ruang for Thailand, 36 knots, 3 single 4-inch guns, 1 single 76 mil, technically, probably just an anti-aircraft gun. You really don't need destroyers with secondaries. 2 twin 21-inch torpedo tubes. So again, not a lot of torpedoes. They are larger in caliber though, so that's nice. And deep water at tier 3, gonna be pretty nice. Not gonna lie. The ranges for these torpedoes would also be up for debate because they're so strong against larger ships. You could want them to be longer range. Because if you're in close range, then that means you're going to run into destroyers more often, which means you're going to be losing more often because you're not going to win a gunfight with 3 4-inch guns. That's the same armament that Wix has, honestly. Actually, exactly the same. Well, on a broadside, I should say. So again, nothing really strong yet, but we do get 4-inch guns and 36 speed, so that's a plus. Next, we go to tier 4 for Zephyr, which is a Turkish destroyer. Again, using Turkey as an Asian country there. 36 knots, 2 twin 120mm guns. Sounds pretty Italian, doesn't it? On 2 triple 21-inch torpedo tubes. So kind of, if at this point, if you had started playing the Italian destroyer line, you'd be probably very comfortable with the tier 4 Pan-Asian destroyer. And your torpedoes are a little bit better because you get triples and they actually hit hard, because Italian destroyers, I would say, would not hit that hard for in terms of torpedo ways or wise. Next, we go to tier 5, Fushun, which would be a Chinese destroyer. This is actually a Gnevny, so a Russian destroyer that was transferred to China. So the stats are for Gnevny: 37 knots, 4 single 130mm guns, 2 triple 21-inch torpedo tubes. Again, don't like copycat ships, so this one would have those deep water torpedoes, which is different from Gnevny, and that is why I still have her in my predictions here. At this point, we would also start seeing a new consumable. We'll get there at the end, though. Next, tier 6 is a Cockatip. I think that's how you say it. Maybe Kasatip, don't know. Another Turkish destroyer, 36 knots, so we do drop 1 knot in speed. 4 single 120mm guns, so we lose a little bit of gun power. And we have 2 triple. Yes, that is a triple. I just made a mistake there. 533mm torpedo tube. So 5 triples. 2 triples, not that terrible, actually. Tier 7, we would have Rajput, which is an Indian destroyer, or transfer to India destroyer. I think it's British, actually. 36 knots, so the same speed. 4 single 120s, same guns, but we get 2 quad torpedo tubes. So more torpedoes, always nice. Next, we go to tier 8, Tanyang, Chinese. This is actually a Japanese Kagero that was transferred to China as war reparations. I'm pretty sure. So same stats as a Kagero with all of her gun turrets, not the improved version of the only 2. So it's kind of more like a Yugumo, I would say, actually. So 35 knots, we drop a little bit in speed, but 3 twin 127mm guns, or 5-inch, and 2 quad 24-inch torpedo tubes, or 610s. Those torpedoes are going to be the largest you will see for the Pan-Asian destroyers, and they will probably hit hard too. And it's going to play pretty much like a Kagero or a Yukukaze. So be very nice. Next is, at 8.9, is a Siliwangi, an Indonesian destroyer. It's actually a Russian Skory class that was transferred to Indonesia. We will see Skory class later on as well, I promise you. But for right now, it is in Pan-Asia. So 36.5 knots, 2 twin 130mm guns. It has 1 twin 85mm if you really wanted to give it a secondary. And then 2 quad, nope, That's Quinn. 2 quintuple 21-inch torpedo tubes. So now we have 10 torpedoes for a broadside, which is really, really strong, especially with the deep water torpedoes. Going back to Tanyang real quick, though, again, it is a Kagero, but with the deep water torpedoes means it is, air quotes, technically a different ship. So that is my impersonation or interpretation of that. Going to the top tier, 9.6, we have Nanjing for China. This is actually a ship that's already in the game, believe it or not. This is pretty dang close to Luda, or Xian is actually how it's in the game, the XI''AN ship. That is the basis for the top tier ship. 36.5 knots, 2 twin 130 millimeter guns, 4 twin 76 mils, probably just used as anti-aircraft, and 2 quad 21-inch torpedo tubes here as well. Now these ships, historically, I'm pretty sure they never actually used torpedoes. They just went to straight to anti-ship missiles. But if we already have Xian in the game with torpedoes, there's nothing saying we can't add another one. Now, the thing about Nanjing, though, is that she would use deep water torpedoes, whereas Luda or Xian uses normal torpedoes. So that still gives her or Luda an advantage versus Nanjing, and it also makes them different. All right, so those are the ships themselves. I'll show you pictures in a moment. But for consumables, we would have smoke. I'm only noticing now I have a lot of destroyer lines with smoke, so probably a couple of these could do without it and change it to something else. But it's too late to do that now. Speed boost, because you have pretty average speed. And honestly, if you can't shoot destroyers with your torpedoes, you're going to want to try and run away from them. So speed boost would be beneficial. Or if you just want to go straight Japanese destroyer version and have a full torpedo build, you could get a torpedo reload booster. Again, you don't have a lot of torpedoes up really until tier 9. So being able to reload your torpedoes that you already have and send more out would be very beneficial. And that is the rundown on the Pan-Asian destroyers. So let's take a look to see what they look like. Lung Tuan here. Never actually got to China. It was actually completed for Austria-Hungary, as you can see there. But the intention was there. So yeah, you have the many small 76 mil guns, which are pretty much not going to do much. And then you have the 2 single 450 torpedo tubes. Again, it's a starting destroyer. The player's gonna play a couple games, promote it, move on. It's not that big of a deal. I understand it's not the greatest ship. Next we have Rang for Thailand. This is a better picture of that. So you have the 3 guns. You have, let's see, one is 4. One is the midships between funnel number 2 and 3, and then the one is on the aft there, and you have 2 twin torpedo tubes. So not the strongest, but also not the worst at tier 3. I mean, it's Wix you're going up against at this point, so it doesn't take much to beat a Wix. But you're not going to beat Wix in torpedo power, I guarantee you that. Next we have Zephyr. So pretty nice modern-esque looking destroyer, actually. I understand that, but with the armament she has, she actually fits in pretty well at tier 4. So you would have the 2 twin 120s and then only 2 triple torpedo tubes. So, and then she's also looks pretty small as well, or maybe she's just tall. It's hard to tell in this picture. But definitely not a bad tier 3. No, tier 4, my bad. Next we go to Fushun for China. Again, it's just a Gnevny, so you have the same setup as Gnevny does, except you have deep water torpedoes. Simple as that. And Gnevny is not the worst in a gunfight. Her rate of fire is not spectacular versus something like a Farragut, but those are 130 millimeter guns. When they hit hard, and it only takes a few salvos to actually sink a destroyer. So definitely keep that in mind. Next we have Kakatip for Turkey again. So these are going to be 4 single 120 mil guns and again 2 triple torpedo tubes. Not terrible. And having more gun turrets actually means your guns are more survivable versus Zephyr. With only 2 twin guns, if one of them gets knocked out, half of your gun power is gone. However, if you only lose 1 gun in Cockatoo, only a quarter of your gun power is gone. So there's benefits there as well. And Fushun is actually the one that starts getting the torpedo reload booster as well. So that's mainly because Gnevny in the game already has a torpedo reload booster as 2. No other destroyer at that tier gets a other consumable, but this one does. So that's nice. Cockatoo, here she is again. And then we go to Rajput for India. So yep, it is a British destroyer that was transferred to India. Looks like actually in 1949. You can see it right there. 4 single 120 millimeter guns and 2 quad torpedo tubes. So pretty nice. We're starting to get an increase in torpedo power. So those deep water torpedoes are really going to start hurting at this point. And at tier 7, you're going to want that because the battleships start getting pretty big. There's a picture of her, or a R-class destroyer. I think it was R-class. Yeah, R-class. Next, we have Tanyang. Again, that's a Kagero, but having a stealthy destroyer with deep water torpedoes would be pretty dang strong. So, you would have the 1 twin 127 mil facing forward, 2 twin 127 mils facing backwards, and then the 2 quads amidships there. Nothing spectacular pretty much other than that. But now we start getting into the higher tier ships. So tier 9, Silawangi. It's a Russian Skory, as I already said. You have 2 twin 130 mils, 1 in the front, 1 astern, and 2 quad. Nope, I did it again. 2 quintuple torpedo tubes amidships. And so this one would actually be very, very strong. I know it says tier 8 in the bottom. Ignore that. That's World Warship stuff. I would have this as a tier 9 destroyer. So it'd be pretty strong, actually. And there's another picture of there that shows her layout a little bit better, too. And then we would go to Nanjing. So again, Luda's already in the game. This would pretty much just be a repetition of that ship, except we would have deep water torpedoes in this case. And you can see what she looks like there. Again, you can see the missiles amidships where the torpedo tubes would be. But as designed, I'm pretty sure they were supposed to have torpedo tubes, but by the time of their completion, they had the anti-ship missiles. And that is how I would see the Pan-Asian destroyers. So yes, the first few are kind of sad, especially tier 2. But the higher up the tier you go, the more impressive they actually get, all the way up until like tier 8, 9, and 10. Those are some pretty strong ships. And with the torpedo reload booster or the speed boost, definitely could make use of these ships well. And if you become accustomed to deep water torpedoes and you can avoid destroyer gunfights for the most part, you can become a really, really strong battleship hunter, a carrier hunter, or even a cruiser killer. It's really up to you. But yeah, the options are endless with these destroyers. It's a new little twist. Each destroyer line has their own little thing that they do best. In this case, it would be deep water torpedoes. Okay, next on the list for Pan Asia is cruisers. Again, you have to have a little bit of give and take for cruisers for a Pan Asia because there's even less of these than destroyers. So I have taken quite a few liberties, but for the most part, I have tried to keep all of the ships as historical as possible. And I have actually gotten all the way to tier 7 with real ships, or at least started construction and laid down ships. So we'll see what it can do. Again, with the Pan-Asian cruisers, deep water torpedoes are going to be a part of them. However, torpedoes will not be the mainstay of this cruiser line. It will be the gunpowder. We will get through that in a moment. So let's take a look to see what ships we will have. We have Ling An for China, 19.7 speed knots, 3 single 120 millimeter guns, This is actually a Japanese destroyer escort that was handed over to China after the war. Fei Hung for China again, 26 knots, so quite a bit increase in speed there. We have 3 single 6-inch guns, 2 single 76 mil guns for secondaries or anti-aircraft, and 2 single 450 millimeter torpedo tubes. These are not submerged actually, and they're actually on the deck. This is going to be the ship itself is a mix between Katori and Yatsen. Now Yatsen is not a fun ship, I promise you that. You're not missing out if you don't have her, I guarantee you. However, you do get one more gun than Yatsen, though it's not really in a better place. But you get torpedoes, which is actually beneficial. And it's actually like the starting German destroyer torpedoes. You have one on each side of like the bridge, which kind of gives you the funny ability to chase down ships and launch torpedoes. You're also faster than Katori, which is nice, and Yatsen actually. 26 knots is nothing to scoff at tier 2, which actually have Fei Hung at a 1.6 specifically because of her armament, mainly her main guns. Next we go to Montfalcon for China. 28 speed knot, so very fast. And yes, I do have her with 2 twin 8-inch guns. 8-inch guns at tier 3 would be a first. But hear me out, it's only 2 twin turrets, one fore and one aft. And honestly, when it comes to battle, I still think St. Louis would win, even though she only has 14 6-inch guns. You obviously can't use all 14 per side, but still, it's quantity versus quality at that point. But having 8-inch guns would make it a very interesting cruiser. She also has 12 single 120 millimeter guns you could use as secondaries, and then 2 single 450 millimeter submerged torpedo tubes, one on either side, so kind of like a Weymouth at that point as well. That one was actually laid down. Okay, so going back to Fei Hung, she was actually built for China, but the Greek acquired her. And then Montfalcon was started in Austria-Hungary, but never actually completed. And then we go to cruiser from Thailand. You actually learn a lot of things in the books I'll show you at the end of these videos. There are some ships I've never even heard about in all my years of my life. So it was really cool to read those. And one of these was Taskin for Thailand. 28 speed, or not speed, 3 twin 6-inch guns, 6 single 76 mils. You can make those secondaries if you really wanted to, because you're at tier 4. And then 2 triple torpedo tubes are 21-inch caliber. So larger torpedoes, more torpedoes. You do revert back to 6-inch guns, but you get 6 of them. In this setup, you have 1 turret up front and 2 twin turrets in the stern. So not the best layout, but you get what you get. And next we go to tier 5 for Babur, Pakistan, which is technically an Asian country. Or you could also claim it's Middle East, but for this case, I would call it as an Asian country. 32 knot speed. This was a British light cruiser. It was actually a Bologna class that was passed down to Pakistan after the war. It has 4 twin 133 millimeter guns. So we actually drop again in rate of or gun caliber. We have no secondaries, and we have 2 triple torpedo tubes. The big thing about Babur is that she would actually start getting some decent anti-aircraft at this tier as well. Again, tier 5, you start seeing some okay-ish carriers. They're not the end of the world, nor are they overpowered, but knocking down a few planes out of the air would definitely help your team. Next, we go to tier 6, Mysore. For an Indian cruiser, it was actually a Fiji-class British cruiser passed down to India. You'll see a couple more of these in other tech trees. I tried not to use copycat ships, but technically everyone is different from Fiji, so still counts in my book. So Mysore has 33 knot speed. She does lose one of her triple turrets that Fiji has, so she only has 3 triple 6-inch guns. She has 4 twin 4-inch, which is standard, and then 2 triple 533 millimeter torpedo tubes. Again, difference between this ship and Fiji, not only is the missing turret, but you also have the deep water torpedoes, and the second quirk of the Pan-Asian cruisers, dive bombers. Yes, I would like to give this line dive bombers, similar to how the Japanese cruisers were, and also kind of how Sovietsky Soyuzes or Soviet Union. There's not a lot of non-carrier ships that get dive bombers. Like Shikuma has it, Agano has it, the Soviet Union does. Oyoto has torpedo bombers, but other than that, there's not any other ship that can carry offensive weaponry like that. So, giving a cruiser line some dive bombers would be kind of interesting. You would only get 2 of them with Mysore, but that does increase all the way to the tier 10. So we'll cover that in a moment. But 2 dive bombers, not gonna make or break the game. And heck, you might just hit a destroyer once or twice. Next, we will go to tier 7 for Irion, which is an Indonesia cruiser. It's actually a Sverdlov Russian cruiser. I originally actually had this at tier 8. However, Sverdlov herself in the game is at a tier 7. So I made the choice to put her at tier 7. 32.5 knots, 4 triple 6-inch guns, 6 twin 100mm secondaries, 2 quintuple torpedo tubes, which is very strong for deep water torpedoes, and 3 dive bombers, because why not? Next we have paper ships and designs, and actually one of my own variation that I actually came up with not too long ago. So my own variation is actually this next upcoming ship at tier 8, King Dao. This is actually, it's a Cow class cruiser. At the end of the war, Miyoko and Takao herself were actually based in Singapore and were so heavily damaged that they were stationed there as anti-aircraft batteries. Especially Takao, she had soaked up 2 torpedoes that sank 2 of her other sister ships, Maya and Otago, in the same battle. So she was not going anywhere for the rest of the war. Historically, she was just brought out to one of the straits near Singapore and scuttled. But in my variation, I have her as actually being refitted with the Mogami and Yamato triple 155 turrets that were discarded in terms of extra AA or increased firepower in terms of Mogami. So they would take those triple turrets and actually refit them onto the Takao, taking off the 8-inch guns. That would give you a cruiser with 5 triple 155mm guns, so 15 of them. So just like a Mogami, except on a Takao hull, which is exceedingly strong. So I did drop the speed to only 33 knots to make it a little bit more balanced. But you would also have the same kind of anti-aircraft defense, 4 twin 127mm secondaries, and 4 quad 610mm torpedo tubes. You could actually also drop that down to 4 triple just to make the ship not broken at tier 8, because honestly she could be a tier 9 or 10 with this firepower. I understand that. So potentially a little bit more work to go for Pan-Asian cruisers, at least at the higher tiers. But I would also like to see a 155 gun caliber Takao. That would be cool. Again, with the deep water torpedoes, could definitely be a good battleship killer. The main thing I was focusing on here is the 155mm guns. They're really good where Mogami is at 7.5. So having them at tier 8 would not be much of a jump. It's kind of realistic, honestly, I feel. And then 3 dive bombers as well, because why not? Next, we go to tier 9, which is Wuhan, is how I've named her. She's actually one of the prototype models for the Project 82 battle cruiser for the Russian Navy. For those of you who don't know that, that is actually the Stalingrad class cruiser, which is actually in the last event. More on Stalingrad in the next video. But it's not... It has the armament of Stalingrad almost, but the design of the ship is different, and that's important to me. So it would have 33.5 knot speed, 3 triple 220 millimeter guns. So we do go back up in gun caliber because we went all the way down to 133 with tier 5, but we had 8-inch at tier 3. But now we're back up to 220, which is like 8.3 or something. I don't know. Actually, I think it's 8.1 or just short of it. 220 millimeter guns. You have 4 twin 130 mils, and you have 2 twin 100 mils. And then technically, you don't have any torpedoes on this design, but it wouldn't be far-fetched to add 2 quad torpedoes on the side, just to keep in line with the rest of the cruiser line having torpedoes. You don't want to have torpedoes the entire time just to take them away at tier 9. Though that is what they did with Project 84 for the Russian cruisers. You have torpedoes all the way from Krasny Kavkaz all the way to Kostroma. And then they take them away for Project 84. So, I mean, they've done it before, but I'd really rather they would not do that. And then 4 dive bombers. Lastly, we have 9.6 cruiser Chengdu is how I would call her. This is the Russian Project X cruiser. Now, if you caught on, there's a couple of Russian cruisers here at the end, kind of based on Irion at tier 7 because the Russians literally gave them an entire light cruiser. So that kind of, you could call that as setting a precedent for future transactions like that and transfers. So that's where I'm getting the Russian cruisers for the Pan-Asian line. Going back to Chengdu, Project X was actually a very interesting cruiser design, and I'll show you what she looks like at the end. 33 knot speed. I actually think that's lower than what she was supposed to be doing. 4 triple 240 millimeter guns. So 4 triple 9-inch guns, which right off the bat is strong. 6 twin 130 mil secondaries. 2 triple 533 millimeter torpedo tubes, and then 12 aircraft. Remember, these are dive bombers. You're going to see when I show it to you, the back half of the entire ship is just like seaplane capable handling, aircraft handling, storage space, stuff like that. But yeah, that would be a very interesting high tier cruiser. So let's start going through the consumables here. At tier 5 and up, we would start getting a heal because that's a normal cruiser thing. And then you would also get the choice of radar or seaplane servicing. This would just cut down the reload of your seaplanes, like getting rearmed, refueled, and things like that. What ship has it? Oyoto has it. Agano has it. It's really useful on Oyoto, I guarantee you. And I think, Chikuma has it too. So this would mean that your dive bombers would drop their attack, they'd come back to the ship, and let's say they have a 50-second reload. Well, you could press that consumable and it'd drop it down to like 20 or 25 seconds. And then they'd be out even quicker, so you could get another attack off. And by the time they get back, that consumable's reloaded again, and you can do it again, all over again. That's how I play Oyoto. So yeah, seaplane servicing would be definitely useful all the way up. Well, Mysore would probably not get too much use out of it, but Chengdu definitely would, because having 12 aircraft, 12 of them dive bombers, that's pretty strong. You could have squadrons of 4, I would say, and the rest would be backup aircraft. And then radar, you know how I feel about radar. It's not broken in this game as it is in World of Warships, but that also means it's not really useful. It's good for locating where the ship is, but if you can't lock onto it, then there's not a chance of you really hitting it. Now, I have done radar assisted shooting before, and I've hit the ship, but it is quite difficult. But having radar and cruisers would be nice. We don't really have a full cruiser line with radar. I do know that from Cleveland to Fargo to Worcester has radar if you wanted to, but those ships are so focused on anti-aircraft and rate of fire that I feel radar is wasted on them. So giving radar to an entire cruiser line would be beneficial. And we already have the Russians out, and they do not have radar. So giving that to Pan-Asian would be nice. Now, there's a lot of perks in these cruiser lines. Like I said, you have pretty strong firepower, especially for the Tier 8. You have deep water torpedoes, and you have dive bombers. Now, do I think they're broken? It might be strong, but I don't think they're broken because the armor probably would be pretty weak. So they'd be like really strong glass cannons. So let's start taking a look at these ships. So again, Tier 1, Ling An for China. It's a Japanese escort from World War II. 3 single, 120 mils, and nothing other than that. Pretty straightforward ship. And there she is. Next we would have Fei Hung. Pretty fast speed. As you can see here, she has the 3 6-inch guns, one fore, one aft, and one randomly amidships. If you can kind of see underneath the first lifeboat there, you can see the torpedo tube, and that'd be one on each side. So if you're heading directly at a ship, you would have the one gun, and you would also have the 2 torpedo tubes. Now that I'm looking at it, you could actually make that amidships gun a 360 turning degree gun, if it works, obviously. That would just make her a little bit more unique. It'd be pretty neat. And there she actually is completed for the Greek Navy. And next we go to Mount Falcone. Again, this is that 8-inch gun armed cruiser at Tier 3, which is pretty strong, but if you only have 2 twin turrets, then kind of acceptable in my opinion. And this is actually the design for her. You can see the 120 mil guns arranged on the amidships deck as well. However, those would only be secondaries. I would not use those as main guns. So it's kind of a give and take kind of thing. By having 8-inch guns at this tier, you could definitely mess some cruisers up and definitely work over some battleships pretty hard. But in return, your rate of fire is going to be garbage, and you're going to be torn apart because your armor is probably garbage as well. Now we have Taskin. So an actual real cruiser, but I couldn't actually find many pictures of it, if any. It was actually confiscated by the Italians during the war, but it was made for Thailand. So we have, as you can see there, you have the one turret facing forward, and then you have the 2 turrets aft. Not the best layout, but hey, it's a Tier 4 cruiser. Nothing special about that, honestly. And then it has the torpedoes. And this one does have aircraft as well. It does have 2 aircraft. However, I do not have them as dive bombers. I only have them as fighters. Because with the next ship, there's Taskin again, Bologna, you do not get aircraft. So I didn't want to start something and then have a pause right after we started, and then start it back up again afterwards. So I just have Taskin having fighters, and then after Baber is when you would get the dive bombers. Next we have Baber. It's a Bologna class light cruiser. It was transferred to Pakistan in 1956, as you can see there, February of 56. She has the 4 twin 133 mil guns, no secondaries, and then 2 triple torpedo tubes right next to the second funnel there. Again, kind of grasping at straws for when it comes to cruisers. So there's probably a better option with like stronger armament or something like that, because you go from 6-inch to less than 6-inch to 6-inch again. So I don't really like that inconsistency, but this ship is definitely stronger than Taskin in my opinion, at least in anti-aircraft defense, and that's kind of why she's at Tier 5 here. But pretty straightforward ship. This is a really nice looking photo too. I do like this photo. And then we get to Mysore. Now this is actually a picture of Fiji, so it has all 4 triple turrets, but this is what the orientation would actually be for Mysore. You'd have only 3 triples, you'd have the 4 4-inch guns centered aft amidships there, and then you'd have the torpedo tubes as well right under the deck. This is also where we would start getting a radar and seaplane servicing for the dive bombers, because this is also where the dive bombers would come into play. So having a radar Fiji would be pretty interesting. Also, these have like normal HEAP shells. and deep water torpedoes. Pretty interesting combo, I feel. Very different from Fiji, even though they are this on paper the same ship, or they have the same stats kind of, but their capabilities are vastly different. There's another picture of her right there. Next we go to Irion. So your standard Sverdlov class cruiser, 4 triple 6-inch. You have your 6 twin 100 mils centered amidships there, and then you have your quintuples smack dab in the middle. You have dive bombers, you have deep water torpedoes, pretty standard, but pretty nice ship. This would be the last Sverdlov class in the game, since we already have 2. We have Sverdlov and we have Mikhail Kutuzov. So adding one more, but with different stats, would be a nice round addition. And there's Irion. And then this is the one that I was saying that I came up with. You have your normal Takao class cruiser. This one shows the 8-inch guns, but you would be adding these guns in place of the 8-inch. It wouldn't be nearly... I'd say it'd actually be very similar to Mogami, because you have a slightly worse forward turret setup, because Mogami has number 1 and number 2 turret on the deck, and the number 3 is super firing number 2. Whereas this one is number 1 is on the deck, number 2 is super firing 1 and 3, and then 3 is on the deck as well. If you don't know what I mean, just look up a picture of Takao, and then look up a picture of Miyoko, and look at the front, and you'll figure it out. But you would have the 5 triple 155s. You'd have slightly better AA, but Takao is not known for her anti-aircraft defense. And then you would have your torpedo tubes, which Takao is one of only a handful of cruisers, and honestly the only heavy cruiser that has forward-firing torpedo arcs. So that would be pretty good to use your torpedoes. Again, they're 24-inch deep water torpedoes. They're gonna hurt. Again, you can make them triples just to make it a little bit more balanced. I would not have an issue with that. And then 3 dive bombers as well, because variation. And then this would be Wuhan. This has the 220 millimeter guns, so like the 8.1, 8.2, whatever. This is very different from what Stalingrad was finally designed to look like. And that is why I have chosen this first version of Project 82, because it is so vastly different. It looks really nice as well. And then you have the secondaries. It didn't originally come with torpedoes, but you could probably put them in midships, kind of like how Irion or Sverdlov had them. But yeah, pretty nice looking ship there. It is in World of Warships as Riga as well. So like where the large boat between the 2 funnels is on the sides, that's kind of where you would have the torpedoes, I would think. But yeah, nice looking ship. Definitely would want that in the game. 4 dive bombers as well, radar, seaplane servicing. And then lastly, we get to Chengdu, or the Project X cruiser. Now this is going to be a very long cruiser, but it's also going to be a very strong cruiser. This is what she looks like. So she has the 4 triple 9-inch guns. She has the 6 twin 130 millimeter guns. She has 2 triple torpedo tubes and enough aircraft supporting facilities in the back for 12 aircraft. So yeah, that's a lot of firepower. Your guns are going to hurt. Your deep water torpedoes, not the best, because you only have a triple on each side. But hey, if you're going to be seen from the moon, honestly, you can send out torpedoes, maybe get a lucky hit, or you rush down a battleship, you slam a salvo in with your guns, you launch your torpedoes, and then you go back to your guns for another salvo. And just having a very strong aircraft cruiser would be pretty interesting as well. We already have Shikuma. It has 8 planes, I'm pretty sure, and that ship is heck of fun. I really love that ship. You have good torpedoes, you have good maneuverability, you have amazing guns, and your dive bombers are just so fun. You can hit targets across the map out of your gun range and set fires, and then the fires do the damage for you, and you can hide behind an island. You don't even have to be seen or shot at. It's really fun. I love using dive bombers like that on other ships, especially when there's enough of them to make a difference. Like if it's a Gano, I don't use those. You get two of them, they're going to get shot down before they even get to the target. So there's no point in using them on anything except destroyers. But if you have plenty of them, like Shikumo or possibly Chengdu here, and then you could actually start using them pretty nicely. This is a kind of blurry, but kind of also in-depth look at Chengdu as well. You can see the guns, the main guns better. You can see the top-down version. You can see the 130 mils better amidships as well. The torpedo tubes are right after the number 4 turret on either side, so kind of like a Graf Spee setup there. And then the entire astern of this ship is just aircraft. So again, really think this would be an interesting ship to add in the game for Pan Asia. And you would have radar and the seaplane servicing again. And the radar is kind of because, well, for the most part, you can just shoot the destroyers, but you can't torpedo them. But you'd also like to know where the destroyers are, because then you could send your dive bombers out there to attack them, because not a lot of destroyers have good AA. So overall, Pan Asian cruisers, I like this setup. Again, King Dao might be a little too strong, but you could also make adjustments, as I mentioned. But overall, I tried to keep it as realistic as possible, and the few paper ships I have are kind of plausible. Instead of scuttling to Cow, you could have refit it into something else, and Project 82 and Project X were Russian cruiser designs, and we already have Irion being passed down to Pan-Asian countries already before. So it sets a precedent for more transactions there. Overall, not too bad. Like I said, there are a lot of perks to these ships. Radar, dive bombers, deep water torpedoes, but I honestly don't think it's too much for the game. I think that'd be pretty okay. The dive bombers, they're cool, but they don't really affect the game until top tier, which at top tier you have ships that have insane amounts of health anyways, so a couple dive bomber strikes is not really going to do that much. Radar, yes, we don't really have a full cruiser line with radar, but then again, you can't lock on to ships with radar, so you would only know where they are. And then deep water torpedoes, only King Dao has a lot of them, and it's only 8 per side, which with the destroyers for Pan Asia, you'd get more than that at tier 9 and tier 10 anyways. So I feel like it's pretty balanced overall, and these Pan Asian cruisers and destroyers, like I said, it's really up to developer discretion, but if they would like to follow this outline, I feel like it wouldn't be a terrible idea either. All right, now we are going to go over a potential Russian destroyer split line. I know we've already gone over some filler destroyers for Russia, but there is also the possibility you could get a split line, just like the Americans have now. There's not many options, and honestly, a couple of them are paper ships, but it would not be a terrible idea all the same. So this would actually be a branch off of Gnevny, and we would go to Storozavoy, which is actually a real ship. You have 36 knot speed, 4 single 130 millimeter guns, 2 single 76 mils, which will probably just be AA, and you have 2 triple 21-inch torpedo tubes. So the same kind of setup as Gnevny, but more anti-aircraft defense. Then you would drop down to tier 7 for Ognavoy, again a real ship, 37 knot speed, 2 twin 130 millimeter guns, 2 single 85 mils, which would probably just be AA, and 2 triple 21-inch torpedo tubes as well. So we're not really getting the strong firepower of like Podvoisky or Leningrad or anything like that, but we are getting more anti-aircraft defense. Then we will drop down to tier 8 to Udaloy. This is a complete paper ship from World of Warships. I have made some changes to it though. 40 knot speed, 3 twin 130mm guns, so the same armament that Grozavoy gets, no secondaries, and 3 triple 21-inch torpedo tubes. Now you have 1 on the center line and 2 on each wing. So on the broadside, you can only actually fire 6 of them. And then we go down to Skori, which is actually the same as Silawangi that we've already seen for the Pan-Asian destroyers. 42 knots, 2 twin 130mm guns, 1 twin 85mm 88 gun, and then 2 quintuple 533mm guns, or torpedoes. So now we get quintuples. For going back to Udaloy, you could actually make those quads as well to give yourself 8 torpedoes per side. The one that World of Warships has actually has quins as well, but I don't want to have a ship with 15 torpedoes, even though it can only send 10 out. That's a big difference from 6 at tier 7. So making it 8 at tier 8 would actually be okay. And then lastly, we finish off with Kiev, which is 42.5 knots, has 3 twin 130mm guns, 1 twin 76, probably just another AA gun, and then 2 quin 533mm guns as well. Now, for these destroyers and pretty much all Russian destroyers, concealment is pretty much secondary to firepower. For example, Kiev is going to be seen from the moon, but she will also be very, very strong with her firepower. It is the same as Grozavoy, but, you know, you have some options still. Yeah. With the introduction of French destroyers, Russian destroyers themselves have pretty much lost all of their value. For American, you have maneuverability. For British, you have consumables. For Japanese, you have torpedoes and stealth. For the Russians, you had firepower because you had the largest guns. You had speed. And now that the French are out, you have both of those except better in the French. You are faster than the Russians, and you have more guns and bigger guns than the Russians. So, you are about the same in torpedoes as well. You don't nearly have as many torpedoes per side as the Russians, but they hit a lot harder and you can single fire them, which we will get to when we review the French destroyers. Still on the line to do that right after these. So, I mean, you just kind of negated an entire destroyer line in one fell swoop. There's no reason to get Russian destroyers right now. But if you add a second line and give them some different, like, consumables or whatever like that, give them some different options, it might bring some life back to the Russian destroyer line. In terms of consumables, starting at tier 6, you already have quite a few consumables, so you would all have smoke. For the second consumable for Skori in Kiev, you could choose between smoke and heal, similar to how Tashkent and Grozavoy have it, though you can actually bring that all the way down to Ognavoy, because Leningrad also has a heal now, that I'm thinking about it. So Ognavoy, Udaloy, Skori, and Kiev could also have a smoke or a heal. You'd have to choose. And then for all of them, you could choose between a speed boost, defensive AA, or a torpedo reload booster, which, if I'm correct, that is everything that Grozavoy has as options as well. You could make it so the split line has different consumables if you wanted to. However, I think just having different ships would be enough. But yeah, there's not much variation between the ones here and the ones already in the game, but just having more ships to choose from is always going to be fun. So let's take a look at those. Here's Storzavoy, pretty similar to a Gnevny, except you have more spaced out engine machinery and boilers and stuff like that. And that's what she looks like. Ognavoy kind of takes that a step further in combining some of the guns. So you have the twins, but you still have 2 triple torpedo tubes. So this is the Udaloy. You have the 2 twin 130s up front, 1 in the back. And then you can kind of see it here, the torpedoes. They have them as quintuples, as I said, but having them just as quads would probably be better. You can kind of see it better there. You have 1 on the center line, or one torpedo mount on the center line behind the second funnel, and then 2 on either side of the ship between the 2 funnels. So max broadside would only be 2 torpedo mounts versus 3, but then you could just do a 180 in your ship and launch out the other one if you wanted to, or you could keep it as backup. So either option is available, but would honestly be a pretty strong ship as well. And then here is Scori. We lose one of those guns, but we gain more torpedoes. So now we have the 2 quintuples on the center line. Be kind of similar to Xi'an or Nanjing. Well, it's actually going to be pretty similar to Siluwangi because it's the exact same ship. So there's that. A pretty nice looking destroyer as well. Kind of like an improved Strozavoy. And then lastly we have Kiev, which was a destroyer leader design. Project 48, as you can see here. You have the 2 twin 130s up front, 1 twin 130 astern, and then you have your torpedoes on the center line, and those would be those quads or quintuples. Pretty large destroyer, probably pretty non-maneuverable destroyer, but also pretty fast, 42.5 knots. So you're going to be pretty, it's actually going to be pretty similar to Tashkent by the looks of it, but not a terrible option. And then you can kind of see what she might look like better here. You can see those torpedoes amidships and the gun mounts where they are. AA is going to be there, but again, with all Russian destroyers, not really a strong anti-aircraft line. So potential destroyer split, but I mean, it's not required, but it'd be nice to have more Russian destroyers. Like I've said at the beginning, this game, the way its current status is, there's a lot of battleships in there. Pretty much a lot of cruisers as well, but you could definitely add more. And the destroyers are very neglected. And carriers, there's like 3 countries with carriers. Now, I know it's going to be hard because those were the only 3 countries with carriers. But if you really wanted to dip into paper ships, you could have a couple other countries have carriers as well. But for right now, focusing on destroyers, a lot more destroyers in the game would make it a lot better, I feel. Adding more variation. So it's not just battleship brawls the entire time. Or if you're like the one destroyer in a game and there's 6 battleships, you're like, yep, this is going to be a hard game. Or if you're one cruiser and there's 10 battleships, it's like, yep, I give one bad broadside and I'm out of the game because I just got Citadel to Kingdom Come. So adding more variation would be good. And a Russian destroyer split could be possible. All right, now that we have finished out all of the existing countries' possible tech trees and tech tree splits and filler ships, it's now time to go over the 2 countries that I would add to the game. The first one being Pan-American. And we have a destroyer line and a cruiser line. Now, when I say Pan-American, it's everything from like Mexico to South America, all the Central American countries. You can even include Canada if you wanted to. However, I counted Canada as more British and Commonwealth in this case. So I do not have any Canadian ships in the Pan-American line. It's mainly South American. So what is the big thing with Pan-American destroyers? Well, you're actually going to be kind of surprised because they're going to be very lacking in torpedoes. And we're going to tell you that right now. Like some of them only have 1 triple launcher and that's it. However, they're going to have pretty interesting consumables, pretty strong anti-aircraft defense. Like if you want an anti-aircraft destroyer, you're going to want to go with Pan-American. And then they're also going to have semi-armor piercing shells or SAP shells, just like Mikhail Kutuzov. We've only seen that once in the game, and they're pretty good. So I really want to see that on other ships as well. And I've decided that the Pan-American destroyers and the Pan-American cruisers should have semi-armor piercing shells. So you would have semi-armor piercing and armor piercing, but no high explosive. Semi-armor piercing would have a really low chance of setting fires, but would also have a better chance of doing just straight damage on angled targets. So let's take a look at the destroyers. So we have Cordoba for Argentina, starting at tier 2, 35 knot speed, 4 single 4-inch guns, 4 single 21-inch torpedo tubes. So you already start off with pretty decent guns, and 4 torpedo tubes at tier 2, even if they're singles, is again pretty nice as well. San Luis for Argentina, again, would have 35 knot speed, 4 single 4-inch, but 2 triple 21-inch torpedo tubes. So we gain a few more torpedoes, but the rest of the stats pretty much stay the same. Next, we will go to Serrano for Chile, which would have 35 knot speed again, 3 single 120 millimeter guns, so increase in gun caliber, but we do lose a gun. 1 single 76 mil, which would probably just be an anti-aircraft gun, and then 2 triple torpedo tubes again. Jarina at tier 5 for Brazil would go 36 knots, so a little bit faster. 3 single 120 millimeter guns, so the same kind of armament, but we get 2 quadruple torpedo tubes here. Now, quad is going to be the highest number of torpedoes you're going to see for this entire line. Next, we get to Antioquia. This is probably going to be the epitome of a torpedo-based destroyer line for Pan-Asia, because it changes from here on out. Antioquia for Colombia gets 36 knot speed, 4 single 120 millimeter guns, so we have another gun now, 2 quadruple 533 millimeter torpedo tubes. These are both on the center line. You can use them both at the same time if you wanted to. That does change with tier 7 for Amazonas for Brazil. We have 36 knots, 4 single 127 millimeter guns, so even bigger guns now. And you do get 2 quad torpedo tubes. However, these are wing-mounted torpedo mounts, so they are side by side, which means you can only use 4 per one side. However, you're going to start seeing at the end that the anti-aircraft defense is going to be steadily increased until it is exceedingly strong. And that is going to pretty much start with Amazonas here as tier 7, because tier 7 is where we start getting some pretty strong carriers. Tier 8 is Marcilio Diaz, again for Brazil. 36.5 knots, 4 single 127 millimeter guns, and only 1 quadruple 21-inch torpedo tube. This is kind of based on the Mahan American destroyers, except where Mahan has 2 wing quad tubes and 1 center line. This one only keeps the 1 center line and trades out her wing quads for more anti-aircraft defense. We also lose 1 of the guns as well. Then we go to tier 9 for Nueva Esparta for Venezuela. Oh, by the way, all of these are real ships. So I was able to find real ships for every single tier, thankfully. Tier 9, Nueva Esparta for Venezuela, 34 knots, which could be adjusted because that's kind of slow. 3 twin 114 millimeter guns. So we do drop a little bit in gun caliber there. And we only have 1 triple 21-inch torpedo tube the entire time. So definitely not a torpedo-focused destroyer line, if you couldn't tell by now. And then lastly, we have 7 de Agosto for Colombia, 32 knots. Again, that could be increased to like 35 or so. 3 twin 120 millimeter guns and 1 quad 21-inch torpedo tube. So I know what you're thinking. These guns seem pretty straightforward for normal ships. You have pretty average to less than average speed. And your torpedoes are very, very weak, especially starting at tier 7. Actually, the higher in the tier you go, the less strong your torpedo firepower is. But alternatively, the stronger your anti-aircraft defense gets. But let's go over the consumables first. They're all going to get a heal. Yes, a heal. I know there's a few destroyers in the game already that have a heal besides the French. However, this entire line would have a heal as well. Probably not nearly as strong as the French heal. You're not going to get 7 of them. Probably like 2 or 3. But that's only because, just like the French, you do not get any smokescreen with these either. You get a French speed boost, so long lasting, and you have like 7 of them. So that'll kind of counteract the slower to average speed you have for a longer amount of time. But it would also decrease your maneuverability at that speed. And then starting at tier 5, you actually get a defensive AA. Tier 5 for a defensive AA is pretty good, actually. Only cruisers start getting that at tier 5, so like Krasny Kavkaz or Fudortaka gets that. Trying to think of Sendai gets that as well. But those are all pretty ineffective. All they do is like scatter the planes, which would kind of be the same thing here. But you have normal defensive anti-aircraft all the way up until tier 7. And then at tier 8, 9, and 10, you get a super defensive AA. So we already have a super defensive AA in the game for Cheyenne. So if a normal AA or defensive AA increases your anti-aircraft power by like 100% or something around there, it doesn't actually say. This one increases your anti-aircraft power by 250%. So an insane amount of damage. And you get super def AA on 8, 9, and 10. Which you already have pretty good guns as well. In terms of tier 8, not so much, but you're gonna be like a Venom at that point with 4 single 127s. But you have less torpedoes, but you have really, really strong anti-aircraft defense. Now, again, you don't have any smoke screen, so you're gonna have to use your speed and island cover for concealment and maneuverability. Your guns are gonna be pretty okay. Torpedoes, I haven't really thought too much in terms of damage or anything like that, or range. I'd say they'd be pretty similar to American or United States torpedoes, just in a smaller package. But the anti-aircraft defense would be very much improved over any other destroyer class. So we first start with Cordoba. Again, for Argentina, real ship, pretty straightforward starting destroyer. 4 single guns, 4 single 21-inch torpedo tubes. The good thing about the single torpedo tubes is that you can individually fire them, and since there's only 1 torpedo to reload, the reload would be pretty low as well, pretty fast. And you would already start with a heel, which is insane. Next we have San Luis for Argentina. Pretty nice looking ship as well. You have 4 single 4-inch guns again. You have 2 facing forward, 1 between the 2 funnels, and then 1 aft. And then you have 2 triple torpedo tubes as well. And there she is again. Next we go to Serrano for Chile. We drop down to 3 guns, but they do increase in caliber to 120 mil guns. So you have 2 up front, 1 aft, and then the 2 triple torpedo tubes again. And you can see that 1 small little 76 mil between the 2 funnels. You can make it a secondary if you wanted to, but probably just use it as an AA. And there she is again. Here's Jarina. Kind of a British origin, if you couldn't tell. 3 single 120 mils, 2 quad 21-inch torpedo tubes. It might look similar to what am I looking for? The other art class, Rajput, that's what it is. For Pan Asian. Yeah, it was Pan Asian. But that one had deep water torpedoes. This one has semi-armor piercing shells and normal torpedoes, but also increased AA. And this is also where we start seeing the defensive AA consumable. So again, quite different from the Pan Asian one or the normal British one. And there she is. Cool. Antioquia. Again, this is probably going to be the farthest you're going to get with a torpedo build for Pan American destroyers, because it just gets worse from here. Torpedo wise, you get 4 single 120 millimeter guns, 2 forward, 2 aft, pretty straightforward layout, and then you get 2 quadruple torpedo tubes as here. You also get quads on Jarina, which is going to be pretty nice. But quads here, pretty large guns, pretty strong firepower, but then this is where we start getting, oh, there's a picture of her. Amazonas is where we start getting some pretty decent anti-aircraft at tier 7 here. We have 4 single 127 millimeter guns, pretty large guns as well. And then you have the 2 quad torpedo tubes. Now you can kind of see it here. You can only see 1 tube, but that's because the other one is directly on the opposite side of it. So decreased torpedo firepower. However, you would have quite a bit of anti-aircraft defense. And there she is. You can kind of see the torpedoes a little bit better there. And then we get to Marcelio Diaz. Again, it does look very much like a Mahan class destroyer because it was based on Mahan class. You have the 4 single guns, so you don't have the 5 that Mahan gets. You only get 4. And you only get the 1 quad launcher between the 2 funnels. But you also get a super defensive AA and a lot more anti-aircraft defense and semi-armed piercing shells. So that's going to be really good against destroyers. And there's another picture of her. Really nice picture of her, actually. Then we start getting to Tier 9, Nueva Esparta for Venezuela. We do start slowing down in speed, but we get 114 millimeter guns and 3 twin mounts. You only have 1 triple torpedo tube. I don't even think you can see it on this picture. But then again, the super defensive AA, the semi-armed piercing shells, especially with 6 of them, that's going to hurt a lot, guaranteed. This is what she actually looks like. And then we get to 7 de Agosto for Colombia. This is actually a Swedish destroyer that was, or it was a Swedish-based destroyer based on the Holland class, but they changed it, I'm pretty sure. And instead of having 2 twin 120s, you have 3 twin 120s. So increased firepower. You can just see all the anti-aircraft mounts everywhere, and smack dab between the 2 funnels, you have 1 quad torpedo mount as well. That's another pretty good picture. So very, very strong anti-aircraft defense, very limited torpedo capabilities, but also some pretty good gun capabilities. And all of these ships have a heal too, so you can get into a gunfight, deal with whatever you're attacking, survive, get into cover, and heal up. And if the carrier tries to spot you, well, you have anti-aircraft to help mitigate that the best you can. So a very interesting and odd destroyer line compared to everything else we have in the game right now, and even all the other lines I've already talked about too. However, I think it would be very nice to have that, because destroyers just get messed up by carriers so easily sometimes. All they have is their small size and their maneuverability to avoid attacks, which makes sense, but you don't really have the ability to shoot down planes. And if you're avoiding attacks from air attacks, then that just opens you up to surface attacks and torpedo attacks that much easier, which are a lot easier to hit. So if you actually have a destroyer line that can go toe-to-toe with a carrier and actually give the damage back in terms of aircraft losses, that would be pretty nice. And honestly, having just a straight gunboat AA destroyer sounds extremely fun. If you have backup torpedoes, awesome. But I wouldn't want that as the mainstay of the line. I like it the way this is. And that is how the Pan American destroyers would be. Alright, next up on the list is Pan American cruisers. We're almost done, guys. Just a little bit longer in this video. But next we have Pan American cruisers. Again, we would have semi-armor piercing shells, just like the destroyers. So increased potential penetration from the quote-unquote HE shells that they don't have, but less chance of a fire. So pretty much just Mikhail Kutuzov all the way around, which honestly, Mikhail Kutuzov is very, very strong when it comes to her gun power, even if it's only 6-inch guns. So I definitely could see some good things happening out of these. It's kind of a conglomerate of a lot of different countries' ships put into one. And once we start getting towards the higher tiers, I did have to pull some paper ships, and even one I just pulled out of thin air myself because of a precedent that was set earlier in the tech tree. So this is by no means perfect, but it would work. So let's just start by going over the ships. So we would start with Paraguay from Paraguay. It's a gunboat, 19 knot speed, 2 twin 120 millimeter guns. It does have 3 single 76 mils, but you just probably make those AA. But at tier 1, you don't really care about AA unless you add that fighter to Bougainville. So it doesn't really matter at that point. Next, we'll go to Almirante Barroso for Brazil. 21 knot speed, 6 single 6-inch guns, 4 single 120 mils, and you also have the option of having 3 single 450 millimeter submerged torpedo tubes. Again, for a tier 2, probably wouldn't add that in at all. But I mean, Weymouth has it, so maybe. Next, tier 3, we have Bahia for Brazil. 28 knot speed, so pretty dramatic increase in speed. 10 single 120 millimeter guns, so you do lose some firepower, but you gain more guns. 4 single 76 mils, and then 2 twin 533 millimeter torpedo tubes. Those I would probably keep. Next, we start getting into the more modern cruisers at tier 4, at La Argentina for Argentina. 30 knot speed, 3 triple 6-inch guns. It's kind of like an abridged or abbreviated Fiji. Kind of knockoff. 4 single 102 millimeter secondaries, and then 2 triple 533 millimeter torpedo tubes as well. Next up, we have Veinticinco de Mayo for Argentina. Now, this is again one of those cruisers that I never had even heard about. I didn't even know there were heavy cruisers for South American countries. So I was pleasantly surprised by this. 32 knot speed, 3 twin 190 millimeter guns. Yeah, these are 7-inch guns. You have 6 single 102 millimeter guns and 6 single 21-inch torpedo tubes submerged as well. These are actually pretty nice looking ships too, so I'd love to see these in the game. Next, we go to tier 6 at Capitan Quinones for Peru. This is another cut down version of Fiji that was transferred to Peru after the war. So you have the 33 knot speed, 3 triple 152 mils, 4 twin 4-inch, and then 2 triple 533 millimeter guns. So where Fiji has HEAP, normal torpedoes, smoke screen, you also have the the Pan Asian one that had the radar, the dive bombers, the deep water torpedoes. This one has the sap shells and the anti-aircraft defense. So very different variations of the same ship. So you can kind of choose which one you want to use depending on your playstyle. Next we go to Tamandare for Brazil, which is just a American Helena class that was transferred over after the war. 32.5 knot speed, 5 triple 152 millimeter guns, 4 twin 127 millimeter secondaries, no torpedoes on this one. And then Santiago. This one is the one that I just kind of tossed in there. So we already saw that the British gave Peru a Fiji class cruiser because they had them in surplus and they were kind of outdated at that point. But you could also take I think it's the Gloucester class, British light cruiser. It wasn't the most advanced either at the end of the war, so it's potentially plausible that it could have been also transferred to a South American country as well. And this ship had a speed of 32.5 knots, 4 triple 6-inch guns, 4 twin 4-inch, and 2 triple torpedo tubes. So kind of similar to like a Belfast or like an Edinburgh at tier 8, but with sap shells. And then we go to Almirante Grau, which is actually a real ship. So surprisingly, that's one of the few high tier ships I can use, except it's not nearly as strong as you might think it is. 33 knot speed and only 4 twin 6-inch guns. Yes, we do lose 4 guns because it's only twin turrets, but you also get a crap ton of anti-aircraft defense. You will understand when you see the ship, but no secondaries, no torpedoes, just straight DACA AA and potentially really fast reloading 6-inch guns as well. And then the last one, 9.6 Sao Paulo, is again a presumption. This is an American light cruiser design, CL-154. Kind of an improvement over, well, actually, it would be an improvement over the Atlanta, but not nearly as strong as Booster. You would have dual purpose 127 mils. You would go 34.5 knots, 6 twin 127 mils. You could actually make that 8 twin. There's actually a few variations of this cruiser design I have at the end of the slideshow here, and I will show you those. Or you could have secondaries or anti-aircraft of 6 twin 76 mil as well. But these are dual purpose, so these would also be very, very strong anti-aircraft ships. You can kind of connect this to like a Cheyenne, actually. That's probably the closest ship that's currently in the game that is similar to this one. So having a Cheyenne is really, really strong. That ship is insanely strong. For consumables, starting at tier 4, because that's kind of where the more modernist cruisers begin, you start getting a heal. Nothing too special, just a normal heal. And then you also start getting a defensive AA. That could change depending on what tier you want the defensive AA to start at, because tier 4 is actually pretty, that's like when carriers start. So you don't really want to be in a Langley and go up against a La Argentina and have all of your planes shot down in one attack, because it popped its defensive AA and shot them all down. Because now you're just worthless. Even more worthless, because I hate Langley. But you get defensive AA all the way to the end. You do not get a super AA, just a normal AA. So that's one difference versus the destroyers versus the cruisers. However, starting at tier 8, 9, and 10, you get a gun reload booster. And remember, you have semi-armor piercing shells. If you have ever played Kutuzov or watched my video on it, imagine that ship with a gun reload booster, and you'd be shaking in your pants, because that would be terrifying. That would also give a little bit of help for Santiago, that British cruiser that I just tossed in there. Because if it is just like Belfast or Edinburgh, those are good ships, but that's where it stops. They're just good ships. But if you add a gun reload booster on those and you turn that into like a mini Neptune for like 10 seconds, 15, 20 seconds, whatever, then that adds some deadly potency to that ship. And especially with the sap shells, you're not going to start many fires. These are not fire starting ships by any means, but they will do damage, straight damage. And heck, you send enough shells at the wall, some of them are going to start fires. You see that on Kutuzov all the time. You start shooting targets, you can end a game with 10 fires. It's not a lot, but it is a lot for Kutuzov. And then, yeah, having like a Cheyenne or a Wooster with gun reload booster, that is terrifying. But again, you would also have like 0 armor the entire time. Torpedo firepower is there for some of the line, but overall it kind of dwindles out near the end, which is fine with me, because I don't really want these to be up close and within torpedo distance anyways. It's just kind of like a backup. And honestly, you could probably take them off of Santiago if you wanted to. So let's start taking a look at what these ships are. So Paraguay, pretty straightforward. It is a tier 1 cruiser, 2 twin 120 mils, nothing special there. It is a pretty large target though, kind of reminds me of Erie, so definitely not hard to hit. And there she is. You can even see like one of her little AA guns there too. Next we have Almirante Barroso. So this has the 6 single 6-inch guns that we are talking about. You have 4, 2 on each broadside, and then 1 fore, and then 1 aft. And that is what she looks like. She also has a handful of torpedo tubes if you would want to add those. Next we have Bahia. This one actually has a couple of reconstructions if I'm correct, but this is the version that I would want to use right here with the 10 single 120 millimeter guns. So you would have, I think it's 6 in the center, and then you have 2 side by side at the front and back. Not entirely sure, and it's hard to tell there. But nice little, kind of like Dresden or Kolberg or St. Louis, something like that. Similar idea. Or Weymouth too. Then we go to La Argentina. So you can kind of see how it's like a knockoff Fiji. It's kind of the same layout, but it's not exactly a Fiji. But you do get triple 6-inch guns, torpedoes, and the 4-inch secondaries as well. For a Pan American cruiser, it's actually not terrible. Then we go to 25 de Mayo. As you can see here, it's a pretty large ship. And this one does have 190mm guns, which at tier 5 is, you would think, whoa, that's pretty big actually for a tier 5 ship. But you also have Kirov at tier 6, which has 190mm guns, but it has 9 of them. So if only having 6 of them, I'd say this ship would be a pretty decent tier 5. So you drop a tier, but you also lose 3 guns versus Kirov. You also get the same kind of number of torpedo tubes as Kirov. You get 3 per side, but these ones are submerged versus Kirov's on the deck. So the angles are worse, but they're less likely to be taken out. La Argentina is also where we start getting the heel and defensive AA, by the way. So yeah, 25 de Mayo, pretty nice looking ships, if I do say myself. I do like the trunked funnel. We will see that with the Spanish cruisers too when we get there. And that's a nice little ship. You can see it's just a nice looking ship. I can't say more than that, but it looks beautiful. I love some of these ships. The Italians really had an idea because these were built in Italy. All right, next we go to Capitan Quinones. Again, this is how the Fiji actually was constructed, but you get the version with or minus the X turret. So it would be a Fiji. I already went through the differences between all 3 of these different Fijis. This one would have the sap shells and the improved anti-aircraft defense with the DEF AA. So pretty cool little cruiser there. Nothing more to talk about. Then we go to Telmandare. Again, it's a Helena. This is actually a picture of a Brooklyn, though. But it would be a Helena class with the 15 6-inch guns, which would be terrifying with sap shells. Guaranteed terrifying. But it'd still be pretty fun. And at a tier 7.5, that's where Helena already is. So no difference there. If you really wanted to make it a 7, then just make it a Brooklyn, because that's where Brooklyn is. So there's no real change in matchmaking there. This is what the Helena looks like. She has slightly different secondaries, but the same number of them. And this is the one where I said you kind of have to make a little bit of, or take a few liberties when designing these, because you don't have a tier 8 for this cruiser line very well. You have Gloucester, I think that's how you say it. It does look like your stereotypical British light cruiser, and it is. However, the funnel positions are actually different, which would make it identifiable in game. Because all the other ones, actually, is Fiji like that? Yeah, so Fiji has the first funnel right after the bridge, whereas Belfast and Edinburgh, I'm pretty sure, have it like amidships and then farther aft. They have it separated from the bridge. So it's just a little bit different. It's not just we're going to take a Belfast or we're going to take an Edinburgh and just change its stats and have it in the game. No, it's an entirely new ship. It might look the same, might shoot the same, but this is also where we get our gun reload booster for Santiago. So that in itself is terrifying. And there's a picture of her. And then we get to Almirante Grau. Again, a real ship. And you can kind of see how more modern she looks versus the other ships we've seen. Like the last real Pan-Asian cruiser was this one, which is an ex-World War II ship. And then we get our first post-World War II ship right here. So yes, you do drop down in gun caliber. Well, not caliber, but number of guns to only 4 twin 6-inch guns. But the amount of anti-aircraft defense you get would be pretty good. Probably faster firing guns as well, and that would increase dramatically when you press the gun reload booster. You would just be non-stop death rainbow kind of idea. But no torpedoes or anything like that. Santiago would be the last one with torpedoes, but you could easily, or just as easily, take those out and add more AA. Yeah. Pretty straightforward little ship. And then for the last one, say Apollo, I have a few designs here of what that would look like. So this is the one. So the centerline turrets are the dual purpose 127s, and the amidships turrets are the anti-aircraft auto-loading 3-inch 76 mils, which is the version I had in the first description. If you take a look at this one, you actually have a slightly different variation. This one still has the 6 twin 127 mils. It has quad Bofors, or 40 mils in the center, or twins, but it also comes with torpedo tubes. It has 2 quad torpedo tubes just left and right of the second funnel. This could also be a variation you get. Or the last one, you could change out the center Bofors to get 2 more dual purpose twin 127s, bringing up the total to 8 twin or 16 guns with a broadside of 7 or 14 guns, and you can still keep the torpedoes. So there's a few different variations. I'd love to see this one would be a more anti-aircraft focused version. This one would kind of be a balanced version, I guess. But this version would also be fun, just to have the random gun mount side by side in the center, and torpedoes would be a more surfaced version, but also increased long range AA, where this would have better close in AA, and this would have better mid range AA, I would say. But overall, plenty of options to choose from. Any one of these would work fine. But yeah, in terms of Pan American cruisers, not terrible. You have still quite a few options to choose from. It's just when you start getting up to tiers, the higher tiers is when you have to start taking liberties and making stuff up. But I use say Apollo because, I mean, we gave the Tamandare to Brazil as the light cruiser, so it wouldn't be far-fetched to say, oh, we would do that again once it was, out of its time period, outdated. That's what I was looking for. So that would finish up Pan American cruisers. Not terrible, again, pretty strong, straightforward. You're going to be focused on guns, semi-armor piercing shells for the most part, and gun reload booster, because those guns are going to really make a difference. That's what they're there for, and they're anti-aircraft defense. All right, we're nearing the end of the video here. We only have one last country to go over and 2 more tech lines. We have destroyers and we have cruisers for pan-European countries. So these are from countries that are not like France, not Britain, not Russia, nor Germany, nor Italy. So everything else you can put together. So we're going to go over destroyers. You're going to find these are actually kind of similar to a few different classes. Pretty similar to Pan American destroyers in terms of a slight focus on anti-aircraft and lack of torpedo power, but not to the extent that which the Pan American destroyers are. These are kind of focused on their torpedoes, even if they don't have a lot of them, because they have fast torpedoes, like 70 plus knot torpedoes. So really, really insane speeds, really hard to dodge, but low damage count. Pretty similar to what the Pan-European destroyers are in, World of Warships. I do like that idea. So I followed through with that for this line as well. So let's just show you what we have here. We have Atos from Greece. She has 32 knot speed, 4 single 4-inch guns, 4 single 533 millimeter torpedo tubes. So again with the 4 single tubes, but again they're going to be pretty fast torpedoes, but they will be fast based on the tier. You're not going to have 70 knot torpedoes at tier 2. I guarantee you that. They're probably going to be like 60 or so, maybe. I don't know. Didn't really look into it. Then we would have Class Horn from Sweden. This is a pretty modern destroyer for tier 3. However, her firepower is what actually makes her the tier 3. She's very fast at 37 knots. A lot of these ships are going to be extremely fast, or at least in the midships for tier. 37 knots, 3 single 120 millimeter guns. Yes, those are pretty large guns for tier 3, but you only do have 3 of them. So you're matched gun for a Wix class. And you have 2 triple torpedo tubes, which, again, you're matched per broadside for Wix class. But then Wix can do a 180 and send 6 more. So it's technically, on paper, stronger. And they actually have similar speeds. I think Wix is 36 knot speed, so not that far off. Next, we have Zagreb from Yugoslavia, 38 knot speed, 4 single 120 millimeter guns, and 2 triple 550 millimeter torpedo tubes. Pretty sure those are 22-inch tubes. So kind of a variation there. The only one with 550 mils, by the way. But pretty good ship overall. You get an extra gun. You have the same number of torpedoes, but they might hit a little bit harder since of the larger caliber. Next, we go to Lepanto from Spain, 36 knot speed. So we do drop a little bit, but we do get a 5th 120 millimeter gun. We get a 76 mil too, but probably just AA, and 2 triple 21-inch torpedo tubes. Pretty straightforward. Next, we go to Portugal for Douro. We have 36 knot speed. We do drop a gun for 4 single 120 mils, so we got one and then we lost it immediately. But now we have 2 quadruple 21-inch torpedo tubes, so the torpedo power has increased yet again. Next, we go to Tier 7 for Hydra, again from Greece, 38 knot speed, so very, very fast. 4 single 120 millimeter guns and 2 triple 21-inch torpedo tubes. So yes, we are increasing speed, but we're losing torpedoes, but we're gaining anti-aircraft defense, which will make a big difference in these upcoming tiers. Oland from Sweden is at Tier 8, 36 knots, 2 twin 120 millimeter guns, again 2 triple 21-inch torpedo tubes. 8.9, we have Östergötland with Sweden, 35 knot speed, so dropping a little bit. These could be balanced versus the other destroyers if need be. 2 twin 120 millimeter guns, again 2 triple 21-inch torpedo tubes, but again increased anti-aircraft defense. And then lastly, we would have the Tier 10 for Holland from Sweden. You could honestly make an entire Swedish destroyer line. I just chose the few that would work the best. 35 knots, again could be balanced if needed to. 2 twin 120 millimeter guns, no secondaries, and you have 1 quintuple and 1 triple 533 or 21-inch torpedo tube. Now, in terms of consumables, they're kind of interesting as well. Again, no smoke. Now, we have had a lot of destroyers with smoke screens in the beginning, but we're going to try and get away from that for the last ones. Not every destroyer needs a smoke screen. In this case, they're going to have the British speed boost, so they're not going to last very long, but they're going to reload really quickly, and you're going to have a lot of them. And starting at Tier 5 with Lepanto, you can get a defensive AA, so kind of similar to the Pan-American destroyers like I was telling you, kind of low torpedo count, kind of increased AA, but not to the extremes that Pan-American have. Like, you still have a pretty decent number of torpedoes. You might be underpowered, but you still have enough to actually take on a cruiser or so. But you're also not going to have the insane amount of anti-aircraft defense power that the Pan-American ones are going to have. You're going to have a little bit less. And then starting at Tier 8, you can get radar, and potentially even before that, but I only have it at Tier 8 for right now. We don't have a destroyer line with just radar. Now, we do have a couple ships or destroyers that have radar right now. We have Legion has it. I think Trafalgar just got radar too, if I remember correctly, not too long ago. I think there might be one more, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. But we don't have a dedicated radar destroyer line. Now, again, you know my take on radar. I'm not going to go through it again. It's not that helpful. In most cases, hydro actually is better than radar, but radar can see farther. So if you're trying to hunt down destroyers, you're going to want radar, because then that kind of eliminates their concealment. And then you can kind of hunt them down with your British speed boosts and sink them with your fast firing guns. And if the carrier tries to stop you, well, it's going to lose some planes, definitely. And then if you have to go versus like a surface combat, you have your torpedoes. You might not have a lot of them. For example, Douro actually has the most, other than Holland, with 8 torpedoes. They're tied there. And yeah, fast torpedoes, they're going to be extremely quick and very hard to dodge, but again, probably lower damage numbers. So kind of similar to German torpedoes, except where German gets hydro as a perk, Pan-European would get the fast torpedoes. So let's take a look at them. Atos. I just love it because it has really weird smokestacks, and I want it in the game. 4 single 4-inch guns is actually not terrible either. You have 1 fore, 1 aft, and 2 amidships. And then you have your 4 single torpedo tubes. You have 2 right next to the first cluster of smokestacks, and then 2 right at the last cluster of smokestacks. So pretty nice there. There's a picture of her. Nice looking ship. Then we have Class Horn. Yes, it's a pretty modern-esque looking ship. I already told you that. But with only 3 guns and one of them being smack dab in the middle, so with kind of limited use, you're not really going to be overpowering anything with your guns other than destroyers. And then you would also have your 2 triple 21-inch torpedo tubes centered amidships, which is pretty much where the Wix class torpedoes are as well. And there's she. Zagreb for Yugoslavia. It's actually the Beograd class destroyers, but I like Zagreb, so I chose Zagreb. 4 single 120 millimeter guns. So we get another gun over Class Horn. Class Horn also has the 120 mils, so there was an increase in firepower there. And then you can see the 2 triple tubes there as well. These are actually the 550 millimeter torpedo tubes, so pretty large for this ship. Here's a picture of her. Tier 5, we have Lepanto. So we get a 5th 120 millimeter gun. You can see that right between the 2 funnels there. So you have 2 forward, 2 aft, and 1 between the funnels. And then you have your 2 triple tubes as well. This is where we start getting the defensive anti-aircraft consumable. You're not going to get a lot of plane kills with this because of just the limited number of AA guns you already have, but it's tier 5. Again, we had this talk with Pan American cruiser or destroyers. This is where the carriers start to get a little bit stronger, so any little bit helps. There she is. Next we go to Douro from Portugal. We drop down a gun, but we get pretty nice torpedoes with 2 quads, so increased torpedo power there. And again, this is going to be one of the strongest torpedo power destroyers of this tech tree. And there she is. Hydra. Okay, a little bit more modern. Really liking the look of this one. Fast speed, 4 guns, triple torpedo tubes, so we did lose a couple torps, but as you can see here, the number of anti-aircraft mounts is pretty much increased. So definitely start shooting down some nice aircraft at this tier as well. Next we get Öland. So the Swedish destroyers, which are actually really nice looking. You can kind of see it here. You have the 2 twin guns, 1 fore, 1 aft. You have your 2 triple tubes centered after the smokestack, and then just everything else is anti-aircraft mounts. This is also where you start getting radar. So if you want to become a destroyer hunter, you definitely could. You could pop radar, you could use your British speed boost to hop in, get really close, use your guns. If you want to use your torpedoes, they're fast, so they're going to get to that destroyer really quickly, meaning it's not going to have much time to maneuver. And you could be a very good destroyer hunter with this ship as well. Same thing with Östergötland. This is what she looks like here. So kind of the same layout, 2 twin guns, 2 triple torpedo tubes, but this ship is just bristling with anti-aircraft defense. Like, you can't look anywhere and not see an anti-aircraft gun. It's actually a real picture of her. She looks really gorgeous. And then we finish with Holland, which the turret you see right there in the center of the screen is actually not a main gun. That is one of the anti-aircraft guns. This The specific picture does have the torpedoes. It's just really hard to see them. But two twin 120s, a quintuple, and a triple. The actual ship in Naval Creed, World of Warships, actually has quintuples for both mounts, which you could do. However, considering that the previous ship only had triples, going from triples to quins is kind of a bigger jump than I would like. So I would like to keep the quin and the triple. Or you could just make it two quads and eliminate the fact of having different number of tubes for torpedo mounts. But that is something that can be decided later on. But you can just see everywhere you look, there is an AA gun. And so the AA is going to be pretty nice on these. But the main thing is going to be fast torpedoes and radar. So yeah, those are the perks of the Pan-European destroyers. There's a few other options you could choose. There's plenty of destroyers to choose from. However, these are what I believe best fit the game in terms of matchmaking and improvements as you go through the tier. All right, the last tech tree to go over that I would expect to see in Naval Creed would be Pan-European cruisers. Again, there's plenty of cruisers to choose from. The Spanish had actually a ton of cruisers, more than I ever thought. Same with the Dutch. You can make two separate cruiser lines with just them alone, I guarantee it. But I try to keep it mixed up and use as many different countries as I could. We got Spain, Sweden, the Netherlands, and actually that's all I have. So I guess I really didn't. But let's take a look to see what we have. Again, we have fast torpedoes, but we're not really torpedo focused on the cruisers, so that doesn't really affect the cruisers. But we start with Van Spijik, I think that's how you pronounce it, from the Netherlands. 19 knot speed, two twin 120 millimeter guns. You're gonna see a lot of 120 millimeter guns. I guarantee it if any of these ships come into play in the game. No secondaries, no torps. It's a tier 1 cruiser. No one cares. Tier 2 Flygia from Sweden is actually a pretty interesting cruiser. It only goes 23.5 knots, but it has 4 twin 6-inch guns. Now you might be thinking that's a lot, but you have one turret on the bow, one turret on the stern, and then you have 2 turrets as wing turrets in the center. So at most you can only bring 3 turrets to bear on any target at any one time, which is only 6 guns, which is pretty actually decent. And you also have 2 single 450 millimeter torpedo tubes if you really wanted to, because for laughs and giggles. Next we go to tier 3 for Navarra from Spain, 25.5 knots, so a little bit increase in speed. We also only have 6 6-inch guns, but you can still bring all 6 to bear on any target on the broadsides, so you don't actually lose any firepower, you just lose a couple guns. 4 single 88 mils, probably anti-aircraft defense, so better A defense here, though it's a tier 3, so you're not even going to run into any carriers. Tier 4, I do have for Tromp, but I can understand why someone would argue why that is not a good idea. Mainly based that she is kind of like a super destroyer, like Capitani Romani from the Italians, but in all respects, she was actually classified as a light cruiser, just a really, really light cruiser. So you could use her as a somewhere else if you really wanted to and trade her out for something else. But I chose to use Tromp as a tier 4 from the Netherlands. 30 knot speed. You have 3 twin 149 millimeter guns and 2 triple torpedo tubes and 1 aircraft. So there's that. Tier 5, Mendez Nunez for Spain. 31 knots, 6 single 152 millimeter guns. These are actually arranged in a very interesting layout, similar to an Atlanta, and I'll show you when we get there. And then 4 triple 21-inch torpedo tubes. That is a lot at tier 5. I understand that. Well, actually it's not, because we already have Krasny Kavkaz with the same torpedoes. But those are also really strong too. So probably short range torpedoes, but still a lot of them. Next, we go again to Spain for Príncipe Alfonso. 33 knots, 3 twin and 2 single 152 millimeter guns, 4 single 4-inch guns for secondaries, and 4 triple 21-inch torpedo tubes again. Tier 6, you are coming across stronger capital ships, so having a little bit more range, a little bit more damage for torpedoes would be beneficial. Tier 7, we have Tre Kronar from Sweden, one of my favorite looking cruisers. 33 knots, 1 triple and 2 twin 6-inch guns. We are losing some firepower versus Príncipe Alfonso, especially in terms of torpedoes when we only have 2 triple 21-inch torpedo tubes. But the number of anti-aircraft defenses increased starting at Tier 7 as well, just like we've seen for the last few tech tree lines. It's kind of very similar to Sverdlov, actually, by the looks of it, but it's just such a nice looking ship. Next, for Tier 8, we have Andracht for Netherlands. This was a planned heavy cruiser, no, light cruiser, that never actually was completed, but was begun. And actually, its guns were transferred over to the Almirante Grau for the Pan American cruiser there. But in this case, we have 2 triples, 2 twin 6-inch guns, and 2 triple 21-inch torpedo tubes. It is an interesting looking cruiser, but not bad by any means. Next, we go to a couple paper ships, but these were actually planned paper ships, so it's not just pulling it out of thin air. For Spain, they were looking to find a design for a better heavy cruiser than the one that they already had, the Canarias class. And so they were looking at triple 8-inch gun cruiser, similar to like a Baltimore or something like that. So they came out with a version, I've called it Glorioso, of a design, 35 knot speed, 4 triple 8-inch guns, 6 twin 90 millimeter guns, possibly secondaries, and 2 triple torpedo tubes. So this is going to be kind of similar to Oxford, or as I've renamed her, Drake, for the British heavy cruiser line. You have those 4 triple 8-inch guns. That's a lot of firepower in a heavy cruiser. But she's also going to be pretty big too. So, and then we top it all off with one of my, again, favorite ships. Netherlands Amsterdam is what I've called her, based on the capital. It's actually the Project P-1047 battle cruiser. 34 knot speed, 3 triple 283 millimeter guns, or 11-inch guns. Now you're probably saying, wow, that's a big caliber of gun for a cruiser. But I'm going to point you out that the heaviest gun on a cruiser in the game right now, that's not a battleship caliber, is actually the top tier cruiser for Germany. I actually can't think of the real name right now, but I've named it Danzig. And it has 350 millimeter guns. And if you really wanted to top that, Kronstadt can equip 381, and so can the O class. So you can have 15-inch guns on those, and they're still classified as cruisers. But I've just decided to use them as 11-inch guns because that's what she was going to be designed with. It's kind of an alternate version. It's like a Dutch version of the Scharnhorst is what it pretty much boils down to. And then you have 6 twin 120 millimeter guns, but not a lot of torpedoes in this tech tree at all. Mainly focused on gunfire power. Starting at Tier 4, you would get heal as a consumable. Pretty straightforward. You don't really want a cruiser without heal. You're not going to survive very long. And also starting at 4, but subject to change, you would get defensive anti-aircraft, and you'd also get hydroacoustic search. Now, this does sound pretty German because it's the same kind of consumables, but they don't get the fast torpedoes. And you also have a mixed mash of light and heavy weaponry. So kind of like Germany, but probably better AA if you wanted to. But if you also wanted pretty light cruiser focused line with hydro, so you could go hunt destroyers, that'd be pretty nice as well. So let's take a look at the pictures here. Here's Von Spajik. It's just the little gunboat, nothing too amazing. Kind of is reminiscent of Hashidate actually, but you have larger caliber guns. There she is, another nice crisp, clear picture. I figure. So you have, this is that weird armored cruiser there that has the two twin 6-inch guns on either beam, and then one fore and one aft. Nice little tier 2 cruiser. And she's pretty unique, actually. And there she is again. Then we go to Navara. So this is actually a reconstructed version of Navara. This is the one that I would like to see in the game. As you can see, you have all 6 of your guns are pretty noticeable. And then your torpedo tubes. Actually, no, you don't have any torpedoes on this one. It's the next one that has the torpedo tubes. But yeah, Navara, just straight 6 guns. Kind of similar to Caledon, except, again, you don't have the torpedoes. And there's a picture of Navara there. Pretty kind of modern looking cruiser, but also like with the gunpowder of a not modern cruiser. So it's a weird mix of the both. That's why it's a tier 3. Then we go to Tromp. So again, technically a light cruiser, but more like a destroyer. But we had those 149 mil guns, 2 in the front, 1 in the back for turrets, and then we have the 2 triple tubes. And then we also get an aircraft, so that's nice. This is also where we start getting the defensive anti-aircraft defense and the hydroacoustic search. There's a picture of her. Then we go back to Spain with Mendez Nunez. You can kind of see it's very reminiscent of a Atlanta class cruiser. You have the 3 super firing turrets in the front and 3 super firing turrets in the back. And then you have a lot of torpedoes as well. This is the one that has the 4 triple 21-inch torpedo mounts on it. Pretty unique cruiser, and I think it would stand out pretty well in the game itself. I'd love to see this. If not in the tech tree, then as a special ship as well. Next, Príncipe Alfonso, light cruiser. This is the one that has the 3 twin gun mounts and 2 single. So the first gun is actually a single. The second one in B turret is a twin. The amidships turret is a twin. The X turret is a twin, and then the Y turret is a single. So the 2 singles are at the very fore end of the ship. But the rest of those are triples. But that gives you a pretty strong broadside of 8 guns. And then again, you have the 4 triple torpedo tubes, which is insane. There's a slightly pixelated picture of her there. Next we go to Tre Kronar. So again, such a gorgeous, beautiful ship. Kind of looks like a Sverdlov, but it's not. These were actually ships that existed, by the way. You have the triple up front, and then you have the 2 twins astern. And then you have the 4 single 4-inch guns, amidships, and then some torpedo tubes near the astern as well. Just really, really nice looking ships, if I say so myself. And these will be a good tier 7. As you can see here, you drop down from, you make the transition from slightly outdated but modernized cruisers to, okay, now we're getting into some really nice looking modern cruisers. And the anti-aircraft defense is going to be increased as well. Next we go to, it's Andracht. It's actually De Zivin Provincian, so you could also keep that if you wanted. But I like Andracht. And so this one is the kind of the strange one, as the 2 triples and the 2 twin guns for firepower. But you also have some torpedoes. It's a straightforward ship. You just kind of get a little bit stronger. This is kind of what she would look like. So you have the triples at fore and aft, and then the super firing guns are actually the twins. So opposite of Príncipe Alfonso. The higher you go up, the less barrels you have. And then this is the beginning of the paper ships. This is Glorioso for Spain. The heavy cruiser design that was being worked on to replace the Canarias class. An artist rendition, but this is actually kind of what I was basing my design off of. Not my work, by the way. But 4 triple 8-inch guns. You do have a quad torpedo mount on either side, and then a handful of secondaries as well, 6 twin 90 mils. So pretty nice looking cruiser. Again, pretty similar to how Drake or Oxford would be or play. And not too overpowered, I don't think, because it'd be pretty straightforward. And you still have fast torpedoes, but again, you're not really meant for getting up close to ships. But they're there if you want them. And then lastly, we have Project 1047, which is, again, a Dutch version of a Scharnhorst, so they're going to have lots of similarities. But we have the 3 triple 283 mils or 11-inch guns. I think it's 11.1s actually. And then you can see the 6 twin 120 millimeter guns as well, but no torpedoes on this ship. There's a slightly better picture. And yeah, that would be the top tier ship. It is very much a large cruiser, but if they can put in the Danzig with 350 millimeter guns, and they can put Kronstadt and the O-class with 15-inch guns, I think we can have another 11-inch gun cruiser in the game. And that is why I think these is the best for pan-European cruisers. So that is going to wrap it up. Again, you're kind of focused on firepower here. You're very similar to German cruisers, so there could be changes to the consumables as well to help make this line a little bit better or separate it from the Germans. You're focused more on your light cruiser firepower with the 6-inch guns. You do have fast torpedoes, but not many ships actually carry them. The only ones that would actually be able to use that is Mendes Nunes and Príncipe Alfonso, but they're at such a low tier that it doesn't quite matter. Heal all the way through. You could give them like a special heal. That would make them separate from the Germans. Def A is going to be nice in any way. I hate carrier planes just as much as the next, actually probably more than the next person. I love shooting down tons of planes. It's the best thing ever. So I am kind of focused on anti-aircraft, if you haven't noticed. But I have tried to avoid that for the majority of the tech tree lines. And then Hydro. You could have full Hydro cruisers as well. Yeah, it's really up to you. So with that, that actually concludes all of the tech tree lines, filler destroyers, filler cruisers, destroyer splits, anything you want that I could expect to see in this game. Now, this does not obviously include any prism, like gold ships, diamond, whatever. That is going to be in a whole separate other video. And that'll be after this one. That's going to take a bit more time to work on. This video alone, just setting up the slideshows and everything took me like 12 hours. So that's going to take some time too. But we'll get there when we get there. For now, let me know down below if you have any inputs, whether you think it could be done better, whether you agree, whether consumables could be different, anything you want to ask at all. Maybe just even say hi. Who knows? I'd love to get some feedback. There's not really many people that comment on my videos, and I'd really like to hear back to see how I'm doing, because I'm just going to keep doing the same thing I am, because I'm not having anyone tell me I'm doing anything wrong. But if you'd like to see something in particular, then shout out to me. I will see what I can do. I have done that in the past. But for the future, we're going to go over the future prism, like all the other side ships that I could expect to see. And then we'll go into French destroyers and the current event and other things like that afterwards. But for now, that will be all. So again, thank you so much for watching. This was a long video, but I did warn you about that. But that's only because I put so much effort into predicting what I would expect to see in this game. Now, my voice is pretty much gone at this point. So I'm going to wrap it up here, but I will see you all next time. Thank you and take care.